little bit of old news, but still interesting news. While I was away in Montana, obviously, there was the shocking or not shocking, surprise or totally unsurprising suicide slash murder of Jeffrey Epstein, the star witness in his own trial, and apparently something of an international man of mystery, um, locked up and engaged in a very nefarious kind of international sex circle. Um, and just before he was due to testify, he somehow managed to commit suicide, even though having just been on suicide watch. And there are a couple interesting things about this that I think are worth talking about. So, first of all, though, I'm going to say, uh, for those of you who still don't know, and one of the main reasons I'm doing this is just to kind of uh, let people know that I am diverging into also doing a podcast just because I'm worried about the continuity of YouTube. There's a risk that YouTube is going to shut stuff down. I don't want to make this announcement all the time, but for the next couple videos, I want to, just so people know. So I'm going to put links in the description to the podcast. There's stuff I'm going to talk about there that's not going to be on YouTube, that I just am not confident of putting on YouTube. Definitely basically anything to do with Zionism. My Zionism videos have already been taken down off YouTube, even though that some of them weren't even about Zionism, but they just kind of were about it a little bit, and that's more than they can take. So, the podcast is free. You just got to download it. So I'm not asking for any money there or anything like that. I don't even think that there's a way to subscribe. I'm just showing people where it is. I'll put links in the description. It is on Apple iTunes now. Uh, I found out, so that's a good place to follow it. Let me see if I can add that on right now. Let's see, iTunes. Yeah. Save. Okay, that should be good for now. So I want to come off the bat and say, like, I don't have any kind of inside information about Jeffrey Epstein, right? I'm not a researcher in that sense. I will say I've read books about child porn rings, child pedophilia rings, sex rings, honeypots, that sort of thing. And that doesn't make me an expert. It just makes me aware that these are things that really happen. This is actually an element of our society. And if you if you think about it, it just kind of makes sense. I mean, humans in general have sexual desires and sexual drives, and yet we know that there are laws and social norms that don't fully encompass what people are into, right? So laws say that you can't have sex with minors, however defined, and there's people who want to have sex with minors. And the thing is, people with no power, with no wealth, still manage to take advantage of people, right? There are people who are completely poor, who are not well connected, who don't have good jobs, who are not particularly astute or high functioning, and yet they're able to, say, rape children or rape women or uh, psychologically dominate somebody in a way that they can take advantage of them. Just anecdotally, in my own experience, I've talked to guys who had sexual relationships when they were pretty young, some of them under 10, sometimes under 13. And some of these relationships were, by their own description, consensual, and some of them definitely were not. Some of them were purely aggressive rape that they suffered for years. And this was never at the hands of anybody particularly powerful or particularly wealthy, just somebody relatively powerful and relatively wealthy, which, if you're 8, is literally any adult. So now, that doesn't mean everybody who is rich and powerful is into this stuff. I'm sure most of them aren't. But you can't imagine when you have somebody who does have interests that are illicit, uh, and is also extremely wealthy and extremely powerful, it shouldn't be too surprising that they would do it. And this is what I had a problem with the Pizzagate stuff, is many people just dismissed it as absurd. And of course, it's not absurd. Now, that doesn't mean that every accusation is true or that we necessarily need to believe everything that everybody says. We've had cases like Dennis Hastert. We've had, who was this longtime Speaker of the House, who was a serial child molester, right? He's a powerful man. And we have many other. The Sandusky case is a very famous one. There's a really good book called The Ultimate Evil, which is ostensibly about the Son of Sam murders, But more or less revolves around that being a satanic murder cult that started off by killing dogs and graduates into killing people on occasion. And while these things might not be super common or applicable to everybody, they are real and they do exist. And the incredulity of many to just dismiss this possibility is really kind of frightening. So with Epstein, it's more complicated than that. There's a good chance that he was tied with intelligence agencies, that this could have been some kind of money laundering scheme, that this could have been some kind of attempt to control or gain leverage over, wealthy people or politicians. And, I don't know how much of column A and how much of column B we're dealing here with Epstein. And so I'm not going to try and address that all here. Um, uh, but what I do want to call this attention to is this is such a blatant example of something happening that defies the official recognition explanation. So, he's on suicide watch, which apparently makes it very difficult to commit suicide. And then he does it. And, to be fair, this was a 60-year-old man who's facing serious charges, whose probably his life is ruined. I would consider him a suicide risk. But what's fascinating is that both of the video cameras that were supposed to record him failed, and both of the security guards that were supposed to be watching him were taking naps. Now, however suicidal he may be or may have been, his suicidal tendencies can't make the cameras turn off and can't make the guards fall asleep. And the fact that all four, and that if that is indeed the only four circumstances, happened at the same time, that just can't be a coincidence. And I even heard Michael Shermer, who has made a career out of being a skeptic who dismisses out of hand stories like this, say that is just not possible. That has to be some kind of coordinated event. So it definitely was. And the one thing I will notice in all the posting I've seen about this, I have yet to see anybody argue to deny this. Now, obviously, the mainstream media is denying this, and they're saying that's a big nothing burger. There's nothing there. But among social media, I don't see people coming to the defense of this. Was not the same with Pizzagate, right? When Pizzagate was debated, you would have people who found it very persuasive, and you had other people who dismissed it out of hand and would argue accordingly. One of my friends in D.C. said, "There's no way there could be a sex ring going on at Best of Pizza," because he had pizza there and he didn't see a sex ring going on. And I was like, yeah, and I've been to the state capitol and I didn't see any corruption happening when I was there, so it must never happen, right? It's bad logic, but at least he was making the argument. But that same guy is not arguing that Epstein didn't kill himself. So what I want to talk about here is kind of more something that people need to be aware of, that there is a systematic bias in favor of the government here. The government has authority. The government has control over the investigative apparatus. It has control over the legal apparatus. It has control over subpoena power, over police power, over law giving power. And so if there's any kind of dispute between, and this is in general, but if you have any kind of dispute with the government is going to be the judge of that dispute. They're going to arbitrate that dispute. They write the laws that govern that dispute. They control the prosecutors. They control the defendants. They control the police. They control every aspect of it. And this puts them at a totally unfair disadvantage. And to make it sound like, well, this is just some kind of objective third party. People talk about the government as if it is an objective third party. Well, there's going to be disputes in society. Yep, fair enough. That's a good point. It's a true point. And so wouldn't it be good if we had some kind of objective arbiter, somebody who could rise above and judge fairly? Well, that would be wonderful. Absolutely. I would love to have that be a thing. And there might be ways to have an impartial third-party arbitration. But that isn't possible when you have a monopoly on that institution, and then anytime you have a dispute with the government. So you and I might have a dispute, and it might possibly be the case that the federal government or the government could be an unbiased judge in our case, although there's no specific reason why they couldn't be biased, right? They could still be susceptible to bribery or ideological bias, but I guess it's hypothetically possible they could be unbiased. But they can't really be unbiased if the dispute is with them, right? Uh, A and B maybe, but not A and government. So and then this goes into, we look at somebody like Michael Shermer, who is like this perennial skeptic, a guy who's going to pick apart everything, and he's going to say, look, the official story is this, and he's going to give it this additional weight and say it's worth much more. It's more, look, the authorities say here, the police say this, the police report says this, the judge says this, the prosecutor says this, and that's enough. And we have to understand that there is going to be systematic, comprehensive bias there in any kind of decision where the interests of the state are brought to bear. Now, that's not to say state um, uh, inquiries and state arbitration universally every single time and every single issue rules against itself. That's not the case. There's definitely a tendency, but they also don't want to appear to be unfair, and so there's that. So they say sometimes it's good to appear to be fair, and there's other times where they can scapegoat and say, well, this one aspect of the government is fine, and it's only this corrupted influence that we are now isolating and going to basically use as a hatchet job. Uh, so I think that that's the main important lesson here, is to go the in any kind of event where um, the government has an interest, which is most, I mean, big events, whether it's 9/11 or Oklahoma City or the coal or Columbine or any of these events that have policy implications, that have implications about the efficacy or the efficiency of the state, right? Even these mass shootings, for instance, um, you don't have to believe that they're false flags or that they're operated by the government, but they could be tremendously embarrassing when police completely fail to intervene, as they apparently always do. And it wouldn't be surprising if they would investigate it in such a way as to not disclose that or to minimize that. I know famously in the Douglas Stoneman shooting in Florida, that the next day that sheriff was on, well, not the next day, but in a couple days, he was in a town hall on CNN, and he made no mention of the fact that his deputies were on location during the shooting, at least four, and they didn't enter the building. They did nothing to intercede. The shooter finished what he was doing, left, and went to Subway, and then he got arrested there after he was no longer killing and no longer really a threat to anyone. And he failed to mention this, and that's probably not an accident. Uh, Now it eventually came out, but the more influence and control they have over the process, the less likely that's going to be. So an incident like Epstein's here just illustrates this very well. And the thing is, this is not like a one-off. The idea that this is able to happen right now in this certain instance doesn't mean, well, it's only this instance, it couldn't happen any other time. It means it's an omnipresent uh, aspect of our society, of having a state that has a monopoly on power or a monopoly on arbitration, or all this deference to authority granted to it, where it can just make these pronouncements, and a lot of people are just going to take them at face value. Now, obviously, there's a lot of mistrust of the government as well, which is very healthy, and I think that this is also kind of accentuates one of the divides within our society, where we have the people who intuitively will just say, okay, if the government says this is what happened and they go through the motions of verifying their claim, then I'm going to accept that. And then you have people who are like, they have the possibility to lie. And not only that, they have the incentive to lie. And so I'm going to operate on that assumption, and then they become much more susceptible to conspiracy theories. Now, that doesn't mean every conspiracy theory is correct, or even that most are. There's an enormous amount of rampant speculation that goes on. Just because the government can lie and can cover up what it does, doesn't mean that every accusation against it is also valid. There's also other problems with conspiracy theories. They tend to fearmonger. They're always trafficking. This is the worst thing ever. This is going to be terrible. It's the end of the world and whatnot. That sells very well. People get really into that. But how many times, that's a different skew there, right? Instead of always saying that the government didn't do anything wrong and there's nothing to see here, you're constantly saying that everything is going to be. You don't believe that Epstein killed himself, or is this clickbait? I think that he probably did not kill himself, or if he did kill himself, he definitely had help. There was a conspiracy of interested individuals who made it happen, because there's nothing he could have done to turn the cameras off. There's nothing he could have done that make the security guards fall asleep, right? So exactly who and exactly why, I can't say that I know. We can obviously point fingers, but I don't have the inside scoop on that. But clearly he knew things about a lot of powerful people, and so the potential number of people who could have been involved is staggering. So no, I don't think that he. I mean, this one of the reporters who's covering this on Tom Wood said, "Look, the cameras are off, and the reporters are, or the cops, the guards are asleep. That means pretty much anything could have happened. You know, like who knows? There could have been a body swap. There could have been, a party. Like they could have, like, several people could have come in and had a conference for all we know, right? There just isn't any evidence of what happened, um, other than he's not there anymore and he presumably died. Um, but yeah, I think that it's very unlikely that he just killed himself. Uh, because again, the cameras and the guards. He was somebody who was at risk of suicide, who would have wanted to commit suicide potentially, but so what if he's suicidal? He can't turn the cameras off. So the point here, though, is that um, if you have a worldview that precludes this happening, where you just think, well, as long as they say that that's what happened, then you're going to trust them. And I know this came up with, like, say, Russiagate. I remember getting in this debate with somebody who, when you read the Russiagate file that the National Security Agency had kind of thrown together, this is our evidence that Russia interfered with our election. It was a huge nothing burger, right? You read it, and there was stuff like, well, the Pentagon or the Kremlin has said that they favor Trump, and the Kremlin has, Russia Today has run pro-Trump this, and all publicly available stuff. No conspiracy there, no collusion, no direct interference, more than them having a stated preference. But like lots of journalists around the world had stated preferences, right? Many people, when Obama was running, you would see stuff from the UK or from Mexico or from wherever, people like, they want Obama to win, and nobody was saying, "Oh my God, this is an assault on our democracy." Um, and if you read the whole paper, it basically, there was nothing there. But then they would say, "Well, there's other stuff. There's really compelling evidence, but we can't share it. It's secret. It's secret evidence. It's secret evidence." And of course, I read that and say, well, okay, secret evidence is not persuasive, right? Secret evidence could be nothing. It could be evidence that's not very good. It could be a lie. We just don't know because it's a secret, right? And this also happened in the lead up to the Iraq War. Colin Powell did his big presentation before the United Nations on trying to construct a case that Iraq had a weapons of mass destruction program, and the evidence that he presented was pretty poor, wasn't very convincing, it certainly wasn't proof. And then he said, well, there's other evidence, there's secret evidence that is proof that we can't show you. And what's funny is, like, in any other context, if a person said, you really should trust me, and I have secret evidence that proves that I'm right, but I can't share it with you, you would just dismiss that as ridiculous. But if the CIA does it somehow, and even though people know the CIA are liars, they believe it. And I remember getting in debates about this, and I would say, look, I find secret evidence is not persuasive. It doesn't mean anything. I can only go off the evidence they actually present, which is nothing. And they would have this attitude of, hey, they've sworn to uphold the Constitution. They're servants. They're public servants, right? Presumably, this means there are uh, not self-interested, that they're benevolent, that they're beneficent, that they have no ulterior motives, that they can't be corrupted, that they can't be wrong, and that everything they do is correct or can't be questioned, right? So none of that's true, and yet that ideology of trust and of presumed authority is there, and they can get away with all kinds of shit as a result of that. So, do, do, do. So that's what we are dealing with here. Or now, again, that doesn't mean that everything that happens or doesn't happen is because of some vast conspiracy, or that the government's constantly covering up shit. I mean, they are constantly covering up shit, but like everything is necessarily government. That's not the case. But what we end up having is, we have part of the country who, believes this is at least a possibility, a plausible possibility, and then has this uh, low level or even high level baseline of distrust as a result, and then you have another part of the society that says, look, as long as the government is rationalizing its own actions and acquitting itself, then it's acquitted, and that's good enough. Kind of reminded of the book The Prime Ministers I just read by Yehuda Avner about Israel. And they talk about the Sabrina Sabara massacre in Lebanon in 1982. So the Israeli army invaded southern Lebanon, and they broke all these promises. They told Reagan they won't go more than 30 kilometers, and they said they won't go more than 40 kilometers, and they ended up occupying like half of Beirut. And partway through, at one point during this, there was a massacre of these two Arab villages by Christian militia, but with the connivance and the help of the IDF. And in the book, Avner kind of makes it sound like, look, this is a tragedy, obviously, but it's really not Israel's fault. It's these Lebanese Christians, which the whole reason that they gave for going into Lebanon was to help the Lebanese Christians. So, okay, that kind of still makes you sort of responsible. But, he made it sound like this, look, there's nothing here. We didn't do anything wrong. And at one point, Menachem Begin, the prime minister, gets on the phone with Reagan, and Reagan's like, I'm feared. This is awful. Like, this looks terrible. You're our ally. We told you not to do it. You did this anyway. And now there's all this blood on your hands. And Menachem Begin says, look, we didn't do anything wrong. And you know how I know? Because I asked Ariel Sharon, the general in charge of the invasion, and he said we didn't do anything wrong. And he kind of says it with like, that's good enough, right? If the general in charge of the invasion says that there wasn't a war crime, then that's it. There wasn't a war crime. Now, as it subsequently turned out, the Israelis, an Israeli inquiry into the matter said that Sharon had, quote, indirect responsibility, whatever that means. So he's a war criminal, but only indirectly, I guess. And you could say that that is more comeuppance than they typically get. He got nothing. He ended up becoming prime minister within 10 years or 20 years of that happening. So, oh, hey, Poe, how's it going? Good to see you. Just dropping in. So, uh, but that's the level where you have, well, this general says that there wasn't a war crime, so there wasn't a war crime. We see kind of a similar thing with the drone wars that Obama raised, where people would ask how many civilians are you killing, and they just said, well, every male of fighting age who was killed is by definition a terrorist, right? So they're not really showing that, well, so these are the people who died, and here's how we know how each one of them is a terrorist in some sense. They just axiomatically define their terms to say, well, anyone that we kill is a terrorist. As long as they're fighting. And even by those own metrics, they were killing mostly non-terrorists, but whatever. And the thing is, I think any rational, objective person who is not completely controlled by conservative bias and their own patriotism is going to look at that with extreme skepticism, if not complete disbelief. But unfortunately, we grow up in the society, we're taught and trained to support and believe in the government, that they're there for us, they work for us, we are part of them, that their role in society is a necessary and benevolent one, and that we should be thankful for, and that they are righteous, right? The United States in particular is this righteous force within the world. And so if these people infused with democratic power uh, tell you that, well, there's nothing to see here, there was no crime, there was no abuse, everything checks out, then there's a lot of people who are just going to say, oh, all right. And then they're going to have this view of history that's based on a series of completely unrealistic, ridiculous claims of innocence by a very, very guilty institution. Now, again, is the government guilty of everything all the time? No, it's not. But it's guilty of a whole hell of a lot more than it's ever going to convict itself. And I think that's a really important thing. We have these myths, division of power. Oh, there's three branches of government, the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive, and then you have the state governments and the city governments, and their antagonism for each other is what keeps them in check. And I think that might sound good in theory, but the system has broken down completely. the executive doesn't appoint judges who are going to strike down their decisions. They've even explicitly threatened this many times. The most famous case, of course, is the court packing scheme under FDR, where the judges had actually struck down parts of the New Deal, in fact, large parts of the New Deal. And so he just said, look, I'm just going to appoint more judges who are not going to do that. And then the court will change. Now, there was a backlash against this. It didn't end up happening, but that had been already happening, right? You don't find a judge and be like, well, this judge doesn't agree with me. He has a different political philosophy from me, but he is actually a wonderful jurist who's very thoughtful, and we can trust that he is going to be the fairest, but most, scholarly and thought-provoking judge imaginable. So we're going to appoint him to the Supreme Court. That is literally never what happens. It's this guy is my favorite lawyer, or this guy agrees with me the most, or is a supporter. He's going to be on the bench. And when he gets there, he's going to ratify whatever I want him to ratify. Uh, Between the states, we have all these the parties have kind of spread. So yes, you might be from this or that state, but you're still a Republican or a Democrat, and your loyalty is to the party. And so the national party is going to tell you how to act, and by and large, they're going to act that way. So the idea, and again, judges are paid by the government, they're appointed by the government, they're following laws that the government write, and so the idea that this is an independent judiciary or an independent, quote, branch, it's, well, okay, you can call it a different branch if you like, it's still the same tree, it's the same organism, it has the same interest, right? A branch on a tree does not have antagonistic interests to the tree itself. They are sympathetic, they're the same organism. But the way people, they use that term branch, which doesn't make sense, but they act like it's this independent, different thing, and it's not. It never has been, and it can't be. The state is never going to allow there to be an independent arbiter above it that can judge it fairly. It can't be judged fairly to get done what it wants to get done. It can't be a state if it's judged fairly. It might be one of the most consistent definition of a state is an institution that has not a monopoly on force, but a double standard on legal theory. Um, Jefferson said that the Supreme Court only gives options and that each branch is supposed to be completely separate. Only gives opinions. Well, so this is important here. So you had the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and the Anti-Federalists were by far the more libertarian of the two groups. This would include somebody like Jefferson or Patrick Henry or John Randolph of Virginia, people like that, whereas the Federalists most famously would be Alexander Hamilton, the Adamses, and George Washington. And the Federalists kind of were, the Anti-Federalists were probably the majority of the country. Your average American, whether they lived in North Carolina or Massachusetts or Maine or wherever, most Americans were probably Anti-Federalists. We don't have specific surveys of this, but this seems to be the consensus among most people. However, among the political elite, among people who were elected to legislatures or who had political power, many more of them were Federalists. And this kind of makes sense. If you're in political power, your view of political power is going to be much better, much higher and more benign than the view of political power of somebody who doesn't have it. Politicians are going to rate their value to the society higher than people who lack that power. So the Federalists were basically in power from during the Articles of Confederation. That's how they were able to get the Constitution ratified. And then the first three terms of the Constitution, so the 8 years under Washington and the 4 years under John Adams. And what happened is finally there was a backlash against basically their low-key tyranny, whether we're talking about the whiskey tax or the Alien Sedition Act, the creation of an army, the creation of a navy. There was a whole list of things that a lot of people were very angry about. And so the Anti-Federalists were swept into power with the election of Thomas Jefferson. But before they took office, the Federalists filled the court system with Federalists. So John Marshall, Joseph Story, these arch Federalists. And these guys had life appointments, and they continued to be in the Supreme Court and the various circuit courts for the rest of their lives, which for some of them was 30 or 40 years. Story was still on the Supreme Court in the 1840s. And they consistently ruled for an aggressive federal government. They consistently, so this wasn't Jefferson's view of them just giving their opinion. No, no, no. They were saying, look, we can define the power of the federal government, and they defined it very broadly indeed, and continue to do so. And then they have set precedent, right? The opinion. So you always hear Marbury versus Madison, all these other laws that give the Supreme Court awarded itself the ability to do judicial review, right? This is a self-awarded power. The Supreme Court gave itself, and then it gave basically also by proxy, it's given the federal government that. But and I have this debate with people a lot. We can come up with a constitution, a contract. There's the contractual view of the Constitution. That's the contract between the people and the government. And this doesn't make a lot of sense. Lysander Spooner made this point very well, and it's a very cogent point. But you could argue, well, it's hypothetically possible. But we can have a contract that says whatever we want, whatever. Oh, if this, then that, X, Y. If there's a dispute, if somebody dies and intestate, whatever. But if there's a clause in there that says that one party gets to to interpret the contract, right, to say this is what it means, then it doesn't matter what the contract says, because the person who can interpret what it means unilaterally, they can just rewrite the contract. I mean, it does not matter what the words are. They can just reinterpret it and be like, well, it says the general welfare, and maybe it sounds like it only means, stuff that it means one thing, but we can interpret it to mean everything, and that's it. And so we had this, where they, for a long time, they said the federal government doesn't have the power to, regulate wages or whatever. That's none of their business. And then one day they just said, oh no, never mind. It has the power to do all that. It has the power to set the prices of food. It has the power to set wages, and whatnot. So, yeah, this was kind of like a very, very conservative anti-revolution to Jefferson, this judiciary. And the other thing is that Jefferson was a huge letdown, right? His rhetoric was pretty good. He had a stated intention of dialing back the federal government, and then he just didn't do it. Now, you could argue that maybe if he had tried, he would have failed, but the evidence is that he didn't really try that hard. So, is this a classic example of someone being corrupted by power? Well, that's definitely possible. It's also possible that he feared that if he tried, there would have been a civil war, that there would have been dire consequences. And he might have been right about that. That's a generous way to read what happened in his administration. Either way, though, wasn't one of the judges Jefferson's cousins? I don't know. Could be. We're talking about a relatively small group of people, so it's possible. Who is he related to? So I think he had clerked for John Randolph. There's a famous lawyer in Virginia that a lot of these guys had clerked for or gotten their law degrees from, including people like Henry Clay, Thomas Jefferson, John Randolph, I think also. So, we're talking about a relatively small group that's running the whole country. Yeah, the Constitution was a centralizing document. Absolutely. The Articles of Confederation were much better. But you had, again, the Federalists, and there's a whole debate here, because federalism means, you have divided powers. You have a central government, but then you have like a federation. You have independent states that come together. But what was actually created wasn't a federal system. It was a central system. There's a central state, and the states, and this really confuses Americans, right? Because Americans use the word state in the same way everyone else would use, say, a province. Now, a state should be a state. England, Germany, Russia's a state, China's a state, Michigan's a state. So they appear that way. Technically they appear that way on paper, but they have not been that way since after they ratified the Constitution. When they were ratifying the Constitution, they were being treated as sovereign states. The treaty with England was signed not with a single body, but with each of the 13 colonies. Many of the 13 colonies explicitly thought of themselves in this way. They said, we are an independent state, and we're deciding to join the Confederation or the Federal Union, but they weren't surrendering their sovereignty. And Jefferson had a role in this. When Virginia joined, he has the Virginia Declaration, which was then echoed by the Kentucky Declaration, where they're basically saying, look, we're joining the federal government, but we are still independent states. This is the Federation. And this debate was never really won academically. It was won on the battlefield of the Civil War. So And then even after the Civil War, when radical Republicans wanted to round up all of the Confederate leaders, especially Jefferson Davis, but also people like Robert E. Lee, and put them on trial for treason, they ended up just letting them all go because they were worried that they would actually win in court. That they would argue in court that secession was legal, that they had a right to secede, that there was no, that the federal government didn't have the right to keep them in the Union, and the Republicans, the radical Republicans, were worried that they might win in court, and so they just said it's better just to let them go, and so they did. So Jefferson Davis, he was held in prison for I think 2 years after the war, and then they just let him go. He lived out the rest of his life. So, um, this was an argument that was won on the battlefield, not legally. Uh, Tom Wood said the Anti-Federalists were actually Federalists. Yeah, so the Anti-Federalists actually believed in a federal system, right? So where you have independent states who are they're coordinating together in a federal system, like Switzerland, but the 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 Federalists are like national. The Federalists wanted a strong central state. They didn't want to have equal sovereign states that are coming into Confederation. They wanted a much more active central state. This is, and again, the par excellence person here is on the one side is Alexander Hamilton, but also people like Washington. Washington was a very clever politician in a lot of ways. His sympathies seem to have been with a central state, but he was shrewd enough to realize that the rhetoric of the country, that the feeling of the country was much more up towards a confederal system or a non-central state. So if you look at and a good book on this that covers this a little bit is The Autumn of the Black Snake, which is about the formation of the American Army. Uh, Washington wanted an American army. He wanted a central military. He wanted a central navy. And the sentiment around the country was that's something for tyranny. That's a terrible thing. That's very dangerous. We don't want that. Militias, they have flaws, but their great benefit is they're not aggressive. They don't invade other places, and they're not really a threat to liberty in the way that a central state is. And rather than come out and just say, well, militias suck, they're terrible, which in certain contexts they are, uh, Washington really said, well, they're wonderful. They do a good job. They've really served a wonderful purpose. We want to keep them. They need to be part, but we also want to have, a small, 1,000 man, 2,000 man, professional army, and basically to fight the Indians, to genocide the Indians. So ended up being what happened. Um, but yes, there's this controversy that the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists stole the name of the Anti-Federalists. You had the party that actually wanted a federal system, which would not be a strong central state, but would be maybe a central organization, but it would be the constituent states that held all the power. That would have been a true federal system. But instead, we have a central system that is set up to kind of look like a federal system. It's actually kind of bizarre. Uh, that Charles guy, you have to be more specific. So, uh, you can see the stealing of the name thing with the LP. The, I've not really been interested in the LP, but it is kind of interesting to see the role that they've played in the movement, or the non-role, or however you want to say it, because there seems to have been almost the entire history of the LP a huge disconnect between it and the libertarian movement generally, which is strange. Um, I say I'm very sympathetic with the work of the Mises Caucus and people like Scott Horton and uh, what's his name? What's the Smith? Dave Smith, because I think it makes sense to have the party be like a vanguard promoter of the ideology. So not necessarily there to win elections, although that's wonderful if it happens, I guess. But um, that it should serve that role, and not, oh, here's going to be the Republican light alternative, which is what it's kind of been, and that just really hasn't done anything for anyone. So there's been a fight between the LP and the libertarian theory for a long time, and I think some of this might go back to Rothbard, right? So Rothbard was instrumental in the foundation of the Libertarian Party and of Cato and Reason, or not Reason, and yet he didn't get along with Ed Crane and the Kochs, who were the Kochs especially were the big names, the big financiers of the libertarian movement. And the schism, it started right at the beginning, and it's continued all the way up till now. And it's still there. Some of the players are still alive, and one of the Kochs is still alive. Ed Crane is still alive. Rothbard's been dead, but that won't stop them from shitting on his grave. Um, Charles Lee, Light Horse Harry Lee. Yeah, like Washington was not a big libertarian. Some of the other Virginians were. Again, Patrick Henry, John Randolph, Thomas Jefferson. Um, these guys were, and then their intellectual heirs would be people like Andrew Jackson. Uh, these guys were much more libertarian than the Federalists. So, I mean, John Randolph and Patrick Henry, they're verging into close to anarchy territory, and that's not where Washington was. Rothbard learned that big business are a part of the state the hard way. Yeah, so states, you have the official state, and then you always have to have special interests that are unified with the state, and that could be an aristocracy, that could be a religion, a priesthood, very common one in antiquity. It could be landowners or nobility. And in market economies, it could be corporations. Now, it won't be every corporation. It won't be a union of all corporations, but there'll be a certain number that are just directly enriched by the state. So these would be like the Lockheed Martins and the Boeings. And then you have others that are reliant on it or depend heavily on it for regulatory support through regulations that destroy their competition, restrict their competition. So, uh, yeah. Now, there's the more fundamental debate of is a corporation inherently part of the state? This is something that a lot of left libertarians will say, or even just socialists straight up, that we can't even have a corporation without the government. I think that's wrong. Obviously, people can form an agreement to work together. But there's some debate here. I've even heard Harry Brown, used to say that you can't have a corporation without limited liability, that it's impossible. That there's no way that you can cooperate with other people without some kind of legal protection that stops you all from getting sued from anything happening, right? If you have a if 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 a Walt Disney employee hits a person with their car, what's to stop every single person who works for Disney getting sued? You need to have some kind of liability. Um, so I'm not sure I agree with that, but that is a debatable point. So the Koch brothers sponsored the Libertarians. Oh, absolutely. The Koch brothers are multi-billion. I think each one is worth $16 billion, or was. Like Charles just died, or David, one of the two. And I mean, they've funded all kinds of things. I mean, one of them gave $100 million to the Metropolitan Opera at one point a couple years ago. So they're very, very wealthy. But yes, they've been bankrolled. There's this term, the Beltway Libertarians. So Reason, Cato, a couple other organizations that are based in Washington, D.C. And these have been, they get other donations, they have other support, but they've been overwhelmingly supported by the Kochs. And then you have uh, Rothbard walked away, and then with Lew Rockwell founded the Mises Institute, which doesn't get Koch money, right? They're completely independent. They walked away. They're not in D.C. They're in Auburn, Alabama. They got as far away from that as they could. Is it David who died? Okay, yeah. And Charles Koch, then I think, if I'm remembering this right, was on the Libertarian Party ticket one of the years, probably maybe 1980. And that was the year they got the most because he was able just to use billions of dollars to advertise. the more power you give the government to control businesses, the more businesses will seek to control the government. This is absolutely true. The more power the government has, the more incentive they do. It becomes suicidal. You can't just sit back and let the government that can regulate you out of business do its own thing. You need to be involved, and so they will be involved. And not only do you need to survive, you need to profit. Yes, the only way to you can't have the interventionists and the socialists have it really wrong because you can't have an interventionist state that isn't going to be corrupt. It's just impossible. That there's going to be special interests that are going to be in there fighting to control and to operate that regulatory system to their advantage. And because there's special interests, because there's concentrated interest in it, the general will for there to not be corruption is not going to be sufficient, right? I mean, if you polled people and they say, "Well, yeah, we don't want a government that is beholden to special interests," but they're they're only invested in that enough to answer a poll question. They're not going to go to DC and lobby, spend. But like International Combine is, Lockheed Martin is, the Koch brothers are, these companies are going to go, whatever, solar panel companies, car companies, GM, Ford, every little association, right? They're going to go. I mean, there's on the side topic here, like like um, the American Association of the AAP, they're going to go do that because they want the federal government to support their policy. So the only way this you can make it work by saying, well, the smaller it is, the more minarchist the state, the less there is to fight over, right? If you have a state that doesn't have the power to regulate commerce or or to tax or whatever, then there's less incentive, and that's true. The problem is you can't get a state that's so minimal that it has no regulations and no taxes. And so whatever vestigial little bit you have left, and it could be a lot smaller than we have now. There's no question the state could be much smaller than it is now. But there's no guarantee that it's not going to grow. In fact, its incentive is to grow. So even if you set it up to be very small and to be very minarchist, to be very constitutional, or however you want to describe, Scott Horton says, as soon as you have an army, there's a company that's going to build the toothpaste for it, and then they're going to go and say, well, if the army's only going to be 10,000 men, the toothpaste company is going to say, well, maybe it should be 15,000 men, and so uh, the incentive is for it to grow. So I thought they were more conservative. They back both, but they're actually, I mean, I've always been more of a Mises guy when it comes to those. I mean, Cato's fine and Reason's fine, but like my heart has been more with the Mises Institute. But as far as I can tell, Charles and David Koch are strong libertarians and maybe even anarcho-capitalists. The Kochs really suck at promoting libertarian politics in Washington. Well, that's just a terrible place to promote it, man. Everybody there works for the federal government. Everyone there aspires to power. They have a will to power. They want to go there to rule other people. That's what's brought them there. They're climbing a bureaucratic ladder. They won an election. They're on a staff. They're all ambitious as all fuck. They have a horrible will to power. Oh, a little story here. Just like I mean, I mentioned this in I think in another video. I mean, like one of my slaves who I met when he lived in Mass. I mean, he lives in DC now and he works for the Fed. He's a regulator at the Fed. Well, this guy has always wanted to, even before he got to college, he was into regulation. He wanted to be a regulator. And when he moves to DC, he's not going to change his mind because he picks up the latest issue of Reason magazine, right? He spent already a decade of his life dedicated to this. He's bought in as much as you can, and he's, saturated himself in the ideology of a interventionist, and that's not going to change because he sees a Cato interview. Uh, bu- 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 Hello, Luke. How's the pregnancy going? Uh, duh, duh, duh. Let's see. I don't understand. It seems like the Koch brothers would benefit from regulations. It depends on what the regulations are, but hypothetically, there's certain regulations that certainly would benefit them. I don't think that they are cynically trying to do that, though. I think they probably are honest libertarians. But Yeah, the only solution is to get rid of the government's ability to regulate. I would go further than that. The only solution is to get rid of the government, period. There is no way to have a state that just can't regulate. If they're able to have elections, if they're able to have legislation, if they're able to have judges, then they can give themselves the ability to regulate. There's no way around that. So that's the only solution. I'm in DC. It's terrible. Yeah, I mean the crowd there, the mentality there, and when I go to DC, all my friends there are ostensibly libertarians, and some of them are indeed very good. I mean, anarcho-capitalists. They're like strong libertarians. But the whole culture there is just so unbelievably vapid. It's kind of if you go onto like the gay apps like Tinder or Grindr, there's this whole hierarchy of status, and the status is based on how close you are to power. So if you're a staffer for say a House Republican or something, well, that's okay. But if you're a staffer for a senator, that's even better. And if you can somehow be associated with the White House, boom, you're like at the top of the heap. And it's kind of nauseating to see them kind of strut about with how far up, what cocktail parties can they get invented to. um, the wife is ballooning quickly. Oh, well, that's really sweet, and it's good that he's going to be intact. He'll thank you when he grows up. uh, I can't find any essays or articles on a fixed constitutional law. Whoa, you guys are going too fast. What do you think about a government with a completely fixed law, or at least a fixed constitution? Well, the problem is, it sounds good, all right? And there's some people who think that's what the Constitution is, but I don't think that there is any way to actually fix it. I mean, you can write in a document, this is fixed, that can't be changed, right? Now, so the United States Constitution has a way to amend it, but let's just say this can't be amended. This is it. This is it. And you could even go back and change some of the wording, like the general welfare clause and the some necessary and proper and things like that, and say, okay, and those would be improvements. But at the end of the day, that's just ink on a page. And they can award themselves other powers. They can interpret the language a different way. They can find ways around it. And unless the only way that really works, I think there are conditions that will allow for minarchy. And the condition that allows for minarchy is that you have a populace that is dedicated to that really does not want the state to get better, that is very antagonistic, or bigger, that's very antagonistic to a state getting bigger, and that will actively resist a state getting bigger. And so if they're willing to, whatever, go on strike, to boycott, and to fight, right? If you have enough of a population, doesn't have to be literally everyone, then that can actually keep a state restricted. The thing that's interesting about that, though, if you have that condition, then you don't need a state at all, right? If you have a population that's willing to, actively defend its liberty against its own state or other states, then you don't need the state in the first place. And if you don't have that precondition, if you say, well, the population really doesn't care, they're not that interested in it, they're not willing to actually defend their liberties. Then it doesn't matter if you have a really great constitution that has lots of really well-defined borders that don't leave any leeway. They'll still find a way to grow. They can just grow, right? They can just interpret it a different way. Ross Perot, I think he ran as the Reform Party, which later became associated with Pat Buchanan. Uh, Yeah, the Charles Koch. Yeah, the Kochs don't only do politics. They patronize all kinds of things. Like I said, they gave $100 million to the Met at one point. Um, Hoppe said the Kochs hired people to go to libertarian events and say bad things about Rothbard. That sounds pretty paranoid to me. I have no idea if that's true, and I don't know the Kochs personally, so I don't know if they're beneath or above that. But some people are that level of petty, so that's not, to my mind, impossible. I don't know if that's true though. I know that the antipathy between them grows deep. I mean, I've read stuff by Ed Crane that's just the amount of vitriol he has against Rothbard, who is now more than 10 years dead. He's more than 20 years dead. Is kind of astounding. Like, come on, get over it, man. He is dead. Uh, and their antipathy spreads, right? It would include people like Ron Paul. So like a lot of these Beltway libertarians, they don't like Ron Paul. They think he's like they basically think he's in the Klan, right? They think everybody at the Mises Institute is in the Klan, which is totally unfair. Um, especially since some of them are like hardcore warmongers. So yeah, everyone say congratulations to Luke. He is expecting a child, and he's not going to circumcise him. So he's making the right choice, and he's congratulations. That's a big deal. But yeah, if they were cynically trying to maximize profits, they wouldn't spend money on that stuff. Absolutely. I mean, giving $100 million to the Met, I guess you could say, well, that looks good, but they could just give $1 million and that would look good too, and they'd save 99 million. I believe that they are sincere, honest libertarians. Now, it is possible to still be influenced by your interest, right? If you look at it and you're like, man, yes, I'm a hardcore libertarian, but man, if we can get this one regulation passed, our bottom line will increase $10 billion. I could they could still do that, and I would almost like forgive them, right? The system is there. It's the same way you feel about somebody who goes onto welfare. I don't want people to go onto welfare. I think you should avoid it. You don't want to be in that position. You don't want to be dependent on the government. That's a horrible position to be in. But morally, I mean, it's there. It's going to be spent. If you're gonna, and if you've worked it all, like you have paid into it, like no, it's not a system where you put in and you get out what you put in, but like I'm not going to castigate that too much. Now, if your attitude is I'm just going to be lazy, I'm just not going to work, and I'm just going to live off this, yeah, you're being a piece of shit. But like to take advantage of a program that's going to be there whether or not you do anything, uh, I'm not going to beat up too much about it. Uh, you live in DZ? Trying to leave. Yeah, it's terrible. Like I like to visit. There's a lot of guys there. DC is one of the gayest cities per capita. I think it's over 10% of the people there are gay. And yet a couple days and it's like I got to get out of here. It's just nuts. Always kind of surprised at people who think the Koch brothers donate millions to political causes and promoting liberty for their own benefit. Why would they? Why not keep the money? Return on investment. Well, people spend money. It feels good, right? People feel good supporting things. They feel good donating. There's a bit debate on altruism. And is there true altruism where you're just doing it for the benefit of who you're giving and not for your own psychological benefit? And I don't think that there is such a thing where people do it for their own psychological reasons. Um, are you accepting Steam Labs? I don't know what Steam Labs is, so probably not, since I don't know what it is. The worst part about DC is the people here. Yeah, look, it just attracts the scum, man. The most uh, egotistical, power hungry, venal, uh, untrustworthy people are drawn. They're not. Is literally everybody there like that? No, of course not. It's a big city. There's good people there. There's interesting people there, but it's awful, man. And it's all a big game, and they all think that they know better than everybody else. Because they've been able to grab power. They don't just say, "Well, I'm fucking power." They don't take the Genghis Khan line, like I'm just in charge. I'm going to do what the fuck I want and fuck you. That type of rhetoric, our morality doesn't really permit that necessarily, at least publicly. So it was more couched in that I know it's best for everybody, and I'm superior in that sense. But that's still a huge ego. Yeah, Parra, look at the Microsoft antitrust case and see what happens if your corporation doesn't lobby. Yeah, so this is I don't know the details here, but apparently Microsoft was like, hey, we're in Seattle, we're going to do our own thing. We're not going to lobby the government. That we have a good product, we have a good business plan. We've got this covered. We don't need to worry about the government. Well, their competitors didn't take that view. So IBM, whoever else, goes to the government like, antitrust, fucking go after Microsoft, and they can spend a couple $1 million over a couple years, and they can get that. So of course Microsoft doesn't do that anymore. Now they play the game too. You kind of have to. But a government with zero lawmakers. Or Michael Huemer has the idea of a negative legislature. So you have one legislature that maybe passes laws, and then you have another legislature whose only function is to repeal laws. They nullify laws. That's kind of a cool idea, but I also mean you're doubling the number of legislatures, so I'm not sure that's a really good thing. But interesting anecdote. The last several Cato versus Heritage debates, Heritage always brings up Rothbard, and then Cato immediately disavows. Oh, I'd like to see a video of that. If you've got a video of that or a link, send that. Yeah, the Cato people hate Rothbard, even though I think he's technically still a shareholder. There was a whole thing because he founded it. He got shares in it. And I don't know if those were ever disabused with. He kind of just walked away and was like, fuck it. And they were like, fuck you. And that was it. And, but, this seems stupid and petty, and it is. But I don't know that the liberty movement has really suffered as a result, because the result is that we have kind of like these two poles of libertarian thought. It's really kind of decentralized and spread everywhere because there's all these independent people. Ayn Rand wasn't associated with either one of those places. Milton Friedman wasn't. F.A. Hayek wasn't. Um, and you have these two. I mean, they agree on so much. It seems like, why are we fighting? But they have different emphases. They have different bases, and I think they've both done a lot. I think, in my opinion, and maybe this is just my perspective, the Mises Institute people have been. I mean, they've been the more radical of the two, and with Ron Paul, and Ron Paul was very much more associated with them. That Rothbard. If you look at the writers that Cato and Reason has, who's the biggest name? Pete Boettke or Don Boudreaux. Not to shit on those guys, or Irving Kirchner. And you compare them to like Rothbard, and I'm not saying this is the person who thinks Rothbard's God and got everything right. Rothbard was dead wrong about a lot of shit, and he was a petty man in a lot of ways. I mean, this is a guy who never left Manhattan for like 20 years because he was afraid to go over a bridge. But fuck, dude, his writing is really good. He was an amazing theorist and a really good economist, and his stuff has been extremely influential. And I don't think anyone else on the Cato side is even close to that level. And with good reason. Fucking guy was smart, and he was dedicated. Right? He was really dedicated. He was very passionate about it, and it comes across. And to some point, he heard his own arguments sometimes going too far, but. Um, Anarchy sounds really scary, but people on YouTube like Brian with Hi McPackFix says that it's more of a scare tactic, anarchy. I don't know who that is, but yes, the anarchy is laden with a bunch of pejoratives, most of which are completely undeserved, depending on the type of anarchy. And there's this deference to states that kind of hides and papers over most of their abuses. So it's kind of like, if the state is killing, if the state kills 1 million people, it's like, yeah, well, we don't want to have anarchy. And if the anarchy had 500,000 people die in murders, people be like, well, goddamn, we can't have anarchy. Look how terrible this is, right? So they're not, the scales are not even, right? They're weighted. I always wondered about. Oh, I lost it. Oh my gosh! Well, now we're talking about Mossad. Jeez, people, you're just trying to get me off these platforms. Holy cow! When did all these comments happen? Always wondered about Ross Perot, only because I remember as a kid them making fun of him on SNL and how much he shook things up when he was on the ticket. Yeah, and there's rumors that he was threatened. He was doing well one of the years, and then he dropped out of the race for several months, and then only to come back at the very end. So the people think like he was threatened by George Bush or something, but we don't really know. Yeah, he was like a nationalist. He was against free trade and all that kind of stuff, but self-made billionaire. Apparently a stand-up guy. That there was, I think, during the when the Shah of Iran fell, he was a big oil guy, and a whole bunch of his oil men were in Iran, and they got taken prisoner, and he like hired special forces to go and save them on his own dime, and then gave them like a parade in Dallas. So it's definitely an interesting guy, but his candidacy really marks the end of any kind of third party involvement. From that point on, the two parties are completely united in stopping third parties. So if you see the debates, the Ross Perot and his vice presidential candidate, who was some admiral, I think a Navy admiral, they were in the debates. So you'd have George Bush, Bill Clinton, and Ross Perot. And the thing is, Ross Perot did well in those debates, but the debates were hosted by the League of Women Voters, which is a nonpartisan organization. And after those debates, and they've been hosting them apparently for like 50 years or more. The Republicans and Democrats got together and said, nope, we're going to do the debates, and they're obviously not going to invite third parties anymore. Uh, bu- 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 What do you think about Cynthia McKinney? So Cynthia McKinney, she's the black congresswoman who's very left wing, but also 9/11 Truth, I think. She used to be on Alex Jones a lot back in the day, like 10 years ago. I don't know too much about her. She seems to fall into that Dennis Kucinich, Mike Gravel, uh, anti-capitalist, anti-market, but anti-war, uh, leftist. So, my heart warms, but I also makes my head hurt half the time. But I also think it's interesting that any Cato guy that brings up Rothbard in a good lift is fired. Any examples of that? I'd be interested. Yeah, my brother is gay. My brother is gay. He knows a lot of gays in DC. There's a ton of gays in DC. A ton. You can hook up with so many people, it's not even funny. And they're all, and they don't even, I mean, okay, this isn't always true, but sometimes they don't even work. The last time I was on the mall, so I was at the National Field Museum, and this guy just hit me up on Grindr, and he was like, hey, you want to hook up? And I was like, it's 2 o'clock. Aren't you at work? Well, I'm at work. I'm supposed to be auditing ICE, but they don't want us to audit them. So I just come into work every day and just am on Grindr. He doesn't have to do anything but go on Grindr and wait for this lawsuit to get resolved. And it's like, how long has the lawsuit been going on? He's like, 6 months. So we hooked up, and he gave me a blowjob. And then I was like, quizzing him about the things he'd audited, and he described how he had audited the Marine Corps and found a $900 billion slush fund. And I made a video about that $900 billion blowjob. So, DC is wild about that kind of stuff. Would you ever take a reparations check from the government if they ever? Sure, but if they did that, that wouldn't be worth very much because there'd be massive inflation. Ba-ba-ba. Da-da-da. Oh my God. Mises is to Reason as what Jacobin is to Huffington Post. Wayhop tells that Rothbard kept his shares in the Koch office, and the Kochs just kept them once they kicked him out. Rothbard didn't think he could sue and win. Yeah, just go start your own. Just go join up with Lou Rockwell and start the Mises Institute and Margaret von Mises, and they did fine. Um, Sometimes the Mises people are too hard on Cato, not sure what they are expecting them to accomplish. Who knows? I don't know what it means to be too hard. There's definitely little love lost. You had Michael Malice, had Matt Walsh and Tom Woods kind of sit down together. But then, as a year after that, the Tom Woods and Sarwalk had their huge falling out. So, and and I've met both sides. I've met Nick Gillespie a couple times, and like he seems like a nice guy, but he's kind of going for the cool dude thing, and it's fine, but it's like, is this what we're really like? That's not really, it's not like really passionate to me. It's not radical. And a lot of people like that. There's definitely a place for like here's a policy position, and like they've done a lot of good stuff. There's tons of good stuff you can read on Cato and Reason. They've done amazing stuff. I know the guy who does all the videos for Reason. I know him really well. He's gay. I met him in DC. And it they do lots of good stuff. I just don't think it's as radical as it needs to be. Like we don't. like to take a page out of William Long Garrison, and I've said this before, you know, if your whole society is ice cold and frozen, you don't want to be lukewarm. You need to be a fucking fire. You need to be hot, and we're in an ice cold society. If we're talking about the growth of the state or state power or trying to get to anarcho-capitalism or even a minarchist libertarian view, we need to reverse course, and that's going to be hugely rare. So a marginal change here and there is not really going to do it, and it's not really going to inspire people. The other thing too is there's two ways. There's the gradualist way, which might work, but the other more likely thing is that if there's some kind of collapse, you need to have some kind of alternative philosophy ideology. And this is something that the Marxists, for all their flaws, had. When the Tsarist empire fell, and there were all these competing ideologies for power, the Marxists had the slogans, and they had an ideology. Now we can critique Marxism and find problems with it, but at least they had an intellectual backing, even if it wasn't a very good one. Libertarianism has that, but it needs to keep that. It can't just be, well, we're basically like the original, but a little different on the margins. But also, people in the comments, don't feed the trolls. It's not going to do any good, and that's all I'm going to say. But I basically prefer a system that allows complete private police, military courts, while also having a small safety net police courts for poor people. So this is interesting because a lot of the arguments for states, they aren't actually arguments for mandatory states that apply to everyone. They're arguments for like a social safety net or like a welfare state. This is especially true with something like schools. When people argue schools, the first thing they say is not that, well, we know that public school teachers and public schools are the best way to educate. They never say that. Because we know that's not true. I mean, the private schools are better and homeschools are better. Like, it's been proven 1,000 times over. So what they say is, well, what about the poor person who can't afford to do private school, or they're an orphan, or they have parents, but their parents aren't qualified to home educate them. And there's lots of things to break that down, but the bottom line is, well, that's not an argument for compulsory schooling for everybody. That's an argument to have a welfare school that's available for people to go to if they think that they need it, right? And it's just like, you don't have a welfare program, you don't have a food program, the food kitchen said this is for everybody. This is for people who can't feed themselves, right? There's a means testing here. So I think there's problems with that system. I don't know how you're going to keep it from growing. I don't know how you're going to fund it. I don't know how you're going to set the lines. Obviously, though, it would be better than what we have today by a long margin. It's just, the thing is, that's always how it starts. It always starts with, we're just going to do a little bit of philanthropy here. It's just going to help. We're just going to help just the orphans, right? We're just going to help the orphans. And then it's like, well, like sometimes there's single moms who are, or maybe there's indigent old people, and next thing you know, 40% of the workforce is on welfare for back problems. Why do you think the School of Austrian economics lost influence? I think they lost more influence in the economics community because of the Great Depression. Well, I don't know how much influence they ever had. Mises had some influence in Austria. So famously, he convinced the prime minister there not to engage in, I think, to nationalize everything. So it prevented full communism. But I don't think they were ever that popular. Yes, Hayek was well respected and had a prestigious position at the university, or the London School of Economics. But even his students, like Lionel Robbins, they were fucking Keynesians by the end of the day. And Keynes was the more famous of the two, and during the Depression became by far the more famous of the two, and the more And the thing is, when you sell stuff that's beneficial for the state's going to buy, and the state has a lot of money to buy it with. So, if you have some kind of research that shows that, climate change is the big problem, well, climate change is bread and butter for a government, right? That's the perfect thing for them. I'm not even saying that it's not true. I'm just saying this is a perfect thing for them to use as an excuse to manage everything, to tax everything, to control everything. Well, Keynes is giving them the same type of thing. Oh, you need to control the economy. You need to control interest rates. You need to regulate X, Y, and Z, and A, B, and C. And you need to tax a lot, and you need to spend a lot. Well, they love all that. They love spending. They love taxing. And so they're obviously going to patronize that more than somebody says, well, you should be as austere as possible. You shouldn't tax anything. You shouldn't spend anything. You shouldn't inflate. You fuck up the economy. Your only position, the only effect you have is to ruin everything. Well, guess what? They're not going to fucking like that person. They're not going to listen to them. But I would just don't I don't agree with the premise that they were ever that popular or powerful. Uh, Source on Rothbard not crossing the bridge. That's super interesting. That's fairly well established. You probably have to Google it. But he's from I think he's from Manhattan or maybe Brooklyn. But he ended up living. He taught at the New York Polytechnic University for a long time, and I think it was like a 15 or 20-year period where he would not leave. You can find interviews of like Walter Block saying how they would have to have conferences there, and then it was very hard. Eventually, he moved to the University of Las Vegas, Nevada, and it was a big deal to get him to like leave the city. And they even say that there's oh, he couldn't get a more prestigious position because you know uh, stigma, bias against libertarians, which there is definitely such a thing as that, but also because he just would like not leave New York City, not leave the Manhattan. If anyone can find a link, they can put that in there, but that's pretty well established. He did eventually get over it, though. Well, this is true with a lot of people who grow up in a city like New York City. They don't like other places. Even like when Dave Smith came up to New Hampshire, you could tell like he was like, man, what the fuck? Where the fuck did I end up? Like this is not New York, and it's not. And if you are used to that society, a place that's not like that is going to be really alien to you. And so you can almost understand it. Now, to the point where it's a phobia, that's a different, like a whole other level. But could Confederacy be formed today? Yes, I think it could. I think you could see, one of the scenarios that could happen is if the federal government is floundering, which it very well could. It could flounder itself. You could start seeing states organizing with each other. So you could see a couple states saying, "Okay, let's get our shit together." And you probably wouldn't have 50 different states doing that. You probably would have groupings of states. So, Texas would probably go to Louisiana and Oklahoma and be like, "Okay, motherfuckers, like this shit's got to end." Whatever's going to happen. They might nominally remain part of the government, but they might start organizing amongst themselves. Same thing, West Coast states, New England states. New England states already do that. So I definitely think that could happen. I think that's one of the more plausible breakups of the United States, actually. So you could have and this, I just thought of this, but like the Roman Empire, it wasn't like it completely splintered when it was divided into the Tetrarchy, into two empires with two emperors and then two Caesars. So basically, two main rulers and two sub rulers. They didn't go to war with each other. They still all one Roman Empire. It was just administered differently. They found it too difficult to administer the whole empire, so they split the administration. These were the reforms of Emperor Diocletian. So Diocletian was the very few emperors in this period who lived out to a natural life, died of old age, and retired. Right, he became emperor who's absolutely in power. He divided the empire. He took over one half. He appointed a deputy. Same thing happened to the others, and they cooperated. And they said, "Look, you administer the West. I'll administer the East." And that system, the empire, I mean, that's considered the decline, but that the empire lasted for more than 200 years after that. And I could definitely see that happening in the United States. If the federal government becomes too just drowns in its own debt, destroys its own credibility, you could start seeing states, they're already doing this to some extent, start to organize more and more with each other. So you wouldn't see Texas and California forming a union, but yeah, Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, the Intermountain West, the New England, the Southeast, the far west, yeah, you could definitely start seeing that happening. And that would be, if not and not technically a name, it would be a confederation. But do you consider some of the private retirement towns in Florida, like where my mother-in-law is, as anarcho-capitalist? Well, they're very close to that, right? It's private property that they own everything, so there's no public space. And yeah, I mean, the other ones would be like homeowners associations. Like, there's plenty of examples. A lot of people in New York are like that. Yeah, a lot. Look, if you're used to the grid, it's hard to leave. So Ross Perot was a nationalist. Yeah, sure he was. Uh, why are gays so much more promiscuous? Testosterone in both parties. Well, so heterosexual men have just as much testosterone as gay men. They don't have any more, don't have any less, but women don't. So in general, so there's a bell curve on women, and the vast majority of women don't want sex as much as men. There's obviously this outlying minority who are as horny as men, but that's very rare. So uh, it's just much harder for straight men to have as much sex as they would like because there's not very many promiscuous women. I don't really want to say promiscuous women who are who desire sex as much as men. So yes, if you have two partners who both have male levels of testosterone, they're just going to have sex much more. And like it makes sense. It makes sense evolutionarily speaking. So a woman, if she gets pregnant, she's stuck with that baby. She's going to have to carry the genes of that man forever. And it's a 9-month investment at least, if not more, more like a lifetime investment. It's a big deal. She needs to have discretion. She needs to be really careful about who she has sex with. Two gay men are not going to have a baby. There's other risks. They can get diseases. They can get emotionally attached and then feel bad about it. There's things that can happen, but they're not gonna get preggers. I saw Charles Murray was on or Douglas Murray was on Joe Rogan. He said, gays can't get pregnant, but that doesn't keep us from trying. Um, so because of that too, then the cultures and then just very different. So whereas straight culture is much more you date and you meet a couple times, and after a while maybe you kiss, and then maybe you hold hands, and then one day maybe you have sex. And I understand that there are heterosexual sexual encounters that are quicker than that and whatnot. There's bars, there is a hookup culture, but it's very marginal compared to gay culture, which is like you hook up immediately. I mean, there's lots of gays who they just that's all they do. They don't. There is no date. There is no small talk. There is just let's fuck. And with uh, it's just a totally different culture. It's just more available. And then that kind of feeds into the hedonism, and then it gets a little bit more extreme because then like okay, I have sex all the time, so how am I going to make this more interesting? So they end up being very, very kinky, and you start having more. I mean, it's just a very different dynamic. Koch kicked Rothbard out of Cato, took all of his shares. Yeah, people have said this. He could have sued, but he didn't. Koch brothers are the reason we have this opioid crisis. I don't see how that is because they're not like I don't know. Nick Sarwark is a piece of shit, dude. I just don't like virtue signaling is more important than murdering people. I mean, he said that he would support Hitler if he was on the LP ticket. And he strikes me when he was at Porkfest, he had this shirt that was like, "I'm an alpha male" or whatever, because he won like this the speaker of the LP party, which is like a position nobody even runs for. Internet's kind of spotty. If that's the case, there's not a lot I can do about it. But thank you for telling me. Private schools are also pretty popular in third world countries. Well, I've seen Reason do shows about this because the public school systems in a lot of third world countries are actually abysmal. Now, they're abysmal in the United States too, but at least they look nice, right? They'll have a nice building. There will be air conditioning. The teachers will dress nice, right? There's not going to be like black mambas biting kids necessarily, but or typhoid epidemics. But uh, they don't really teach people well either, right? There's higher scores in the United States because the kids are learning anyway because they're from middle class families who value education. So if you're interested in education and you live in Nigeria, it makes sense to scrounge together and like pay to have your kid educated by a professional and not a government bureaucrat who literally doesn't give a shit. Uh, yeah, most Americans were literate, and if you read what people were writing, they seem to have been more literate. Like the baseline level of rhetoric was much higher than it is today in terms of the complexity of the grammar and of the size of the vocabulary. So yes, it's there's this just completely mythological narrative that everybody was ignorant and illiterate, and then the government invented schools, and then they educated everybody and made us all smart. And then because before that everyone worked in coal mines. It's completely a myth. It's completely made up. That's not what happened. There's no history books that even paint that picture. It's just a myth. Duh, duh, duh. I don't think you can put links in comments. I don't know, but you can put them in the comments on the video after. Bu- 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 Why does the LP take an official stance on abortion and not circumcision? That's a good. Well, I don't know. First of all, my guess is that circumcision has been uh, the de facto in the United States. It's just been assumed. People don't even debate it, and so why would they? It's only now becoming an issue, and only marginally. Also, although I think that there's a very strong libertarian case against circumcision, if you read the writings of the origin of the main like Rothbards, their view is much more towards parental authority, and so they would be very sympathetic towards the parental right to commit circumcisions, and for no small reason other than I guarantee Rothbard was circumcised, right? And one of the things that we know for certain about circumcision is that somebody being circumcised predisposes them to support circumcision. Now, this is not because they have experienced being uncircumcised and they then experience being circumcised, and they now know that circumcised is better because they've experienced both. They've only experienced the one, and they have a psychological imperative because of the trauma that was induced and because of the socialization that they've gone through and the rationalization of what was done to them, that they want to perpetuate it. And we see this all the time. Like the ratio of a doctor or a medical expert who will recommend circumcision is almost perfectly aligned to whether they are themselves circumcised, or if it's a woman, if her male relatives or sons are circumcised. So my guess, it just has not been an issue in the United States. It's only, I mean, the first, I haven't read any before the 1990s. It was very, very rare for anyone to question. Some people were, uh, back in the 60s and 70s. It was incredibly rare. It's still marginal. It's becoming more and more popular. It's become, or not popular, but more and more contentious. But no, it's not an issue. And I think that they would have a problem because there are, when I've debated this, I think the libertarian case is very strongly anti-circumcision. And what's interesting is that libertarians are very receptive to arguments that the rest of the population is not. I went to listen to Ron Goldman, who has written a book, Circumcision: The Hidden Trauma. So it's a really good. He's also written books against circumcision from a Jewish perspective, and he works down in Boston. I think he's a professor at Boston University or Boston College, and he was saying they've done surveys of people on what reasons would you find persuasive to not circumcise your child, and things like, does the child have a right to their body? Does the child, yeah, they don't rank very highly at all. The main ones would be like, mothers don't want to cause pain, right? They're worried that the surgery will hurt their child, which it will, and so that's the main reason. But the idea that the child has rights that the parents can't violate, that's not something most people really give a shit about. Most people tend to view their children as their property that they can do whatever they want with. Now, they can't, legally they can't. And if you really break it down, like, okay, if it was really your property, you could do whatever you wanted. You could throw it away, you could chop the ears off, right? And they understand that, but intuitively, when you get in a circumcision debate, they'll be like, "Oh, no, no, it's our child, it's our choice," right? They treat it like an extension of their body. If I wanted to get my ears pierced, I can get my baby's ears pierced. I want to be circumcised, so I can circumcise my baby. But of course, you can't tattoo your baby, you can't put lip discs in it, whatnot. So the problem is, so a lot of libertarians do actually find that argument persuasive, but a lot of libertarians, for will think, well, parents should have a lot of rights. But the other thing is, A lot of libertarians are very skeptical of the government, and they think, hey, if you ban circumcision, isn't that going to be just one more law? And I mean, when I've debated this, I've had libertarians who would be like, this would be a police state. If we ban this, you'd have to have a police state to stop all the circumcisions. And so, you're basically a Nazi, and I've been called that, right? So, I think a lot of that is psychological. I know it's you shouldn't psychologize people like this, but we know that circumcision has that effect on people. And I think that's what's going on. But that's probably why the main reason is it probably just hasn't been an issue. But this is increasingly changing. And Andrew Yang, for all of his stupid faults, has at the very least, even though he opposed circumcision only in the most tepid way imaginable and almost completely retracted instantly, at least he's kind of introduced it into the dialogue a little bit. Okay. Was he at Porkfest? Who are we talking about? Nick Sarwalk was there. Buh, buh, buh. In a video a long time ago, you talked about being in the closet and possibly someday having biological children with a woman. Is that still the case? Yeah, it would be nice to have children, but I just, practically speaking, other than like secretly knocking somebody up, I don't see how it's going to be difficult. That's a big investment. That's something I wouldn't take that lightly, and I don't see it being done not lightly anytime soon. But, also being a man, it's not quite as much of a rush as if I was a woman. What do you think about evictionism as opposed to pro-choice? I am not persuaded by evictionism. I've talked about this before. Uh, I think that's a total misnomer. The problem is that it's not like the baby just got there on its own. So let's say that I'm out in my yacht and I go to get a beer from the basement or from the cabin below, and I find out that you have snuck on board my yacht, that you're a stowaway. I didn't invite you on. I didn't put you there. You snuck on because you were hoping to whatever hitch a ride, and I can be like, get the fuck off my yacht, and I can throw you off, and you might even drown. And I probably wouldn't do that, but I think there's an argument that ethically I might be able to do that. I might be able to evict you, or at the very least evict you in a way that you wouldn't die, right? They'll drop you off the next little island or whatever. So yeah, that's I'm okay with. But the situation is 100% different if the only reason you are there is because I put you there. If you were just doing your own thing, you're minding your own business, and I just took you and put you on my boat, my yacht, and I took you out to the middle of the ocean, I'm like, all right, motherfucker, I'm evicting you now. I'm murdering you. The only reason you are in danger is because of me. Now, the only difference is in abortion is that you didn't abduct a child, you created a child. You decided to have sex. Maybe you didn't want to have a child, that's fine, but you risked having sex. And that child it's not their fault. And I use this analogy many times. Like if I get in my car and I go on the road and I accidentally hit somebody on the street, I owe them restitution, right? I'm liable. And I can't say, listen, I was just going to go to Dairy Queen. I wasn't trying to hit you. I was just going to have a good time. I didn't try and hit you. It just happened by accident. And you could even say I tried, I stepped on the brakes or whatever. It just happened. I'm still liable, right? The fact that that wasn't my intention doesn't mean a thing. And since I'm responsible for your injuries, I have to take care of you. And if they say, hey, he's going to have to be on life support for 9 months, well, so fucking be it. I should have thought of that before, right? You're still responsible. So the only case this isn't true is if the woman is raped, and even then, it's not the baby's fault, it's the rapist's fault. So no, I think evictionism is a clever argument. I think it's been very interesting to see the pro-choice side of the debate has started to invoke evictionism as an argument because frankly, they don't have any other good ones, right? Their arguments are really basically, we should just have the right to kill a baby. And actually, they just deny that it's a baby, which doesn't get anywhere. I mean, you can call it a clump of cells and a zygote and whatever else, but it's a human life. You're killing it. It's literally homicide. And their arguments have been really bad. So they found these really obscure Rothbardian and Walter Block arguments about evictionism, which are better arguments. But no, I'm not persuaded by them at all. If you are responsible for putting them in that situation, then you cannot evict them. John Gatto stated that compulsory schooling, adopting the whole word approach or the phonics approach, is responsible for the decline in literacy. And just going to school is I mean, school is just a terrible. It's not. It's destructive to learning. I had a friend who was very pro circumcision. She wasn't Jewish, but thought that it was better for her kids. She spent $300 per circumcision for her baby boys. That's awful, but it's very common. Uh, you shouldn't circumcise your kids, but obviously the government shouldn't be able to take your kids away from the kid being circumcised. So now we get into this debate. What's my ideal here? So I believe circumcision is a fairly blatant and a fairly serious rights violation. If you were to just go up to an adult, right, you go up to an adult and you just chopped off their foreskin, that would be serious assault and battery with a deadly weapon, no less, because you're using a scalpel, you're using something, a knife, right, to do a very sharp knife, and you did it without their consent. That would be a very, very, very serious crime. Now, if you say, well, instead of an adult, you just did it to a baby, I don't, and it's not just assault; it's sexual assault, right? You're committing a sexual crime, and many activists will even say it's technically rape because you're inserting. Right, one of the stages of a circumcision is to insert the probe between the prepuce and the glans, so it's insertive. So you could technically say it's rape, but it's definitely assault and battery. And I don't see how, well, it's a baby, so it's okay. It's not. It's less of a crime. Yes, the baby isn't going to like file a police report or dial 911, but I don't see any other difference. Again, and it's really weird how people will kind of, well, it's just a baby. Well, so can we rape babies too? Because they're not going to report it, or they're not going to remember. It's really strange because you could go out, if you went up and you just started fondling a baby's dick, playing with it and sucking it with your mouth. Yeah, you could get in serious trouble, man. You're molesting a child. You could go to prison for life. But if you do it and you're a rabbi and it's at a bris, then you can't be prosecuted, right? It's totally legal. They will not even regulate that. So New York City, which won't let you braid hair without a license, will not regulate a fucking mohel from sucking a baby's dick with his mouth after he's ripped the foreskin off with his fucking thumbnail. It's so fucking weird. Like, so, uh, it's a rights violation. And if we're going to have a state and they're going to have laws that prevent this, then that's what it should do. This should be a crime to do. And there should be penalties for doing it, for the doctor, for the insurance company, for the hospital, for the parents. Now, in an anarcho-capitalist society where we don't have a state, these should all be torts. So anyone who does this can be sued by the person later. And now the problem, and this is an interesting question, when you deprive someone of their foreskin when they're a baby, there's a good chance they're going to grow up and they're not going to miss it. They're not going to remember it. And especially if they're surrounded by everybody else who's circumcised, they're just not going to know any better. And it's kind of like if you say you're a baby and you're born and you have $1 million inheritance from your great aunt. But of course, you're a baby. You don't even know what money is. You don't know you have an inheritance. And let's just say that your parents decide they want you to have money that's more like how much money they have, so they take half the money. They take $500,000. They take it away, they cut it away. But you don't remember the $500,000. You grow up and you turn 18, you get the $500,000. Have you been robbed? You're going to say, I'm happy. I still have $500,000. That's hot. I feel great. It feels good. It's the most $500,000 ever. You never had $1 million though, right? So is that a crime? And I would say yes, that definitely is still a crime. And I've talked to my lawyer friends about this. They say parents have fiduciary responsibilities to their children to do what their children would most likely do. Very few intact children decide to get circumcised, less than 1%. And that's even in a place like the United States where foreskins are demonized and where doctors are encouraging people to get circumcised right, left, and center. It's still like 1%, maybe less, that decide to get it done. So when you have a newborn baby boy, the chances that he would ever decide to get circumcised are very low, less than 1%. And so it is completely unreasonable for the parents to say, I'm going to decide that this is my baby's best interest. Your baby would not make that choice were it given that choice. So no, it's a tort. They should all be sued. And until we have anarcho-capitalism, I think that the only answer is for the government to ban it. Now, if we want to talk about starting task force and SWAT teams, no, I don't. I mean, I wouldn't favor that. That would be a really bad thing. But if we're gonna ban, and I've used this point with the other libertarians, if you're going to say that we should have laws against robbery and assault and battery, then why exclude this one type of battery and assault? It doesn't make any sense. Definitely not pro Cirque after hearing about the rabbi and the herpes. Yep. The fact that you would justify that shows that there's something non-objective going on, right? The fact that people would defend that, which many people do, even non-Jews will defend that and be like, "Look, it's their religion, blah blah blah." It's like, okay, sure. What do you think? What do you suppose is the biggest difference between libertarians and non-libertarians in terms of their thought process? Well, the biggest one is that libertarians are using a thought process. The vast majority of people are not. The vast majority of people just have they're conservative. This is what they always believe. They have their intuitions and they just rationalize whatever those are. So if they grow up in a more conservative household, they believe in the military and they believe in the police. And they maybe they believe that you should kind of be left alone, sort of maybe, but like it's kind of up to the government to decide. And like a lot of leftists, they kind of believe, well, you should have universal health care and you should be in a union. But they don't really like analyze it. These people haven't read tons of books. They haven't tried to go and form any kind of consistent principle or philosophy. Jonathan Haidt's research shows this very, very well. The people's moral thinking is filled with contradictions, and even like really smart people. So, last night I had a guy from Harvard over, and really cute guy, really nice guy, very smart, right? He wasn't a legacy, he wasn't a super rich kid. He was a regular kid from Ohio who got into Harvard because he's really smart, but he's not really smart. Like when we started talking about ethics, and it came up like two brothers, like gay brothers having sex, and this is exactly a question that Haidt would use, and he would do these questions about people. He would ask about incest, and people would say incest is always wrong, and he'd be like, well, why is it wrong? It's like, well, because your children could, you know, they could be fucked up. Okay, then that's why there probably are taboos against incest. He said, okay, but let's say in this scenario that the woman is sterile, so she can't have children. So what's the problem? Right? They both agree. I think the story was, there's a brother and a sister, and they're out together. They love each other, and one day they decide to experiment with their closeness, so they have sex, but they take measures. There's no chance she's going to get pregnant, and they do it, and then they just kind of keep it their secret. And so people couldn't explain. They just thought it was wrong and gross, and they couldn't say why. And when I asked this Harvard guy about, well, what's wrong with two gay brothers having sex with each other? Why is that wrong? They can't have a child. They cannot commit incest. There will be no pregnancy. And he's like, it's just, I don't know. It's just gross. That's just their intuition, right? So there's no principle there. Now, libertarians don't always do this, but most libertarians, I think, do. Now, that doesn't mean they always get it right, right? Libertarians will construct ethical systems and they will be wrong a lot of the time. They will overemphasize this or ignore this, or they'll make mistakes because we're human. We all make mistakes, but they are trying to do this. And so they have much higher, and I think Haidt's research has shown this, libertarians have much more principled, coherent political philosophies, moral philosophies than anybody else. Because like questions like is incest okay and why stump everybody, except for libertarians pretty much. So that's the main difference. Um, then there are other ones like where libertarians tend to value liberty very highly and autonomy, whereas most people don't so much. But I think that's the biggest single one. Do you think that there are fundamental psychological differences between libertarians and non-libertarians? If so, what do you think? Well, I think that there are tendencies, right? If we bell curve it, yes, but there's also overlap, right? There are libertarians who have normal, um, psychological profiles, or even like left-wing psychological profiles. Uh, so there's tendencies, but there's not overlap. But there is overlap as well. Uh, if you take someone up on your helicopter and you can't take him off your property, the helicopter, until he is safe from him until you land. So you should be able to evict and able if they are viable. Yeah. So evictionism is justifiable if the fetus is not being killed. Maybe, but even then, I doubt it because I think that, like I said, I use the example if I hurt somebody or if I hit somebody with my car, I owe them restitution. And the restitution would be getting them back to health and then, for their pain and suffering, right? So if they break their leg, I got to fix their leg. If they have to go on life support for 3 months, I got to pay for that plus the damages, whatever. So for a child, how much this gets into the very fundamental question of what are the parents' obligations to the children, if any. And what's really disturbing about like some of the stuff that Rothbard said is basically that parents have zero obligations to their children. That a child and a parent they have nothing to do with each other, and that if a child is demanding something of their parent, that's like an involuntary positive obligation. And I think that's wrong because it's not involuntary. Unless you were raped, which is a very small proportion, you voluntarily either decided to have children or to take part in an activity that risked children being created. And so you are responsible. And I think the answer to this is not, there isn't, I think, a clear answer, but it is, what is our society? What do you think? Or maybe even specifically, what do you think? What do parents owe their children? If you believe that a parent should provide for their children everything they need until they're 18, let's just say, and you knock a girl up when she becomes pregnant, then I think that you could be reasonably expected to provide for that child up until that point. And the only way you could really get out of that is if you could find somebody else who would take on that burden for you. So if you could find someone else who adopt it. Uh, as far as abortion goes, you could evict, yes, but your responsibility to the child would not end at that point. Your responsibility would be to take care of that child until whatever in your head, right? So if it was 18 or if it was 25, I tend to think people overestimate. I think that children, once they become teens, are probably able to be let go and made free and emancipated. But whatever it is, I think that's what you're liable for. Yeah, I've talked about this before. Um, but so evictionism it makes more sense if viability can be, if you can save the fetus if you're not killing it, and then you're actually evicting it. The big problem with evictionism now is it's completely a euphemism. Okay, they're not going in. When you get evicted from your apartment, the landlord comes and they kick you out. They don't reach in with giant forceps and rip your arms and legs off and then rip your head off and then have a vacuum come and suck your brain out. Okay, that's not evictionism. That's a butchery and a murder. And so what evictionism is today is ripping the baby up with forceps or a vacuum tube and then calling it evictionism. No, you just committed an infanticide. And you could say it's also an evictionism, but it's also a murder. Now, if we get to the point, and we will get to the point eventually, and to some extent maybe already are, we can remove a fetus from a womb, put it in an artificial womb, without too much of a detriment. Because you can't do it and say, well, there's a 90% chance it's going to die in the artificial womb, so that's okay. No, no, no. Until that's roughly equivalent, you can't really do it. But let's say you could. But I still think that parents have an obligation to their children up to the point that they become viable adults, not just viable babies. Now, they can surrender that. They could transfer that right through adoption, but I think that's the only real way. Sorry. Just You think that a zygote that is a day old is just as human as a newborn baby? Okay, this is kind of a moot point in a lot of ways because nobody gets an abortion at a day old, right? You don't even know you're pregnant at a day old. You haven't had time to do the test. By the time people find out that they're pregnant and have done the test, we're not talking about zygotes. We're talking about life, heartbeats, brain activity, brains, all the parts are there. So I think that is uh, kind of irrelevant in a large sense. But to be to be perfectly blunt, As soon as conception happens, it's a life form. It's an independent life form. Like, so that cell, that even that single cell, it's not just its mother. It has a different DNA. It is a different organism. You are not your mother, right? You and your mother are distinct. And the moment you didn't become distinct when you were born, or at 9 weeks, or at 18 weeks, or when you turned 18, you became distinct when you were conceived. On not day one, on second one. That's when you became distinct. And not just distinct, alive. And what type of life? Human life, Homo sapien life. At any point after that you are killed intentionally, it is a homicide by definition. Now, homicides are justified sometimes. Self-defense, we could debate, but hypothetically, capital punishment. There's types of manslaughter, right? Suicide. Um, there might be cases like lifeboat scenarios where it makes sense, although this is almost never true with abortion, but hypothetically. So does abortion ever meet the standard of a justifiable homicide? And the answer is no, or almost no. I mean, there might be some very rare cases where life, or, oh, well, a good case might be like, say the mother needs to have chemotherapy that would kill her fetus, but she'll die if she doesn't get it. So what do you do? Well, I think there's an argument there in that case, but it's alive, right? So the question is, when do human rights begin? And it's very hard to separate that from human life. And most people don't consistently, well, she's in a coma, so she has no human rights. She's very small, so she has no human rights. If we're going to do that game, then newborn babies aren't humans either, right? And the academics who argue you should be able to commit like literal infanticide, like the governor of Virginia, aren't wrong. So that's where I put it. I don't really buy into some innate human characteristic. There's a lot more to do with the intelligence and capacity of the suffering. So killing retards, killing people who are asleep, killing people who, I mean, when people make this argument, they're almost never consistent about it, right? They make this argument that would not only apply to infants or zygotes or whatever. They make an argument that would apply to huge other categories of people, uh, and I feel like it's special pleading. There is an argument. Look, I have said that I'm open to someone saying, okay, well, there's a definition of personhood that's not tied to biological life, and here's what it is. And I just haven't heard one that's consistent or doesn't beg the question. So that's too much uncertainty for that's. I need a better. If you're going to argue for terminating a life, a human life, a homicide, you need a good argument. It needs to be a very good argument. You have to have a good reason. You can't have something that like, well, it sounds okay, but I'm not really applying it consistently. No, that's not good enough. I can't in good conscience justify that. I can't rationalize that without a good argument. And I would hope, and that's just not for the baby, that's for me, right? I don't want like someone like, well, he's gay, he's never gonna have kids, is he really alive? Like, okay. Giving the baby herpes. That sounds like a circumcision thing. We've all been conditioned to accept male circumcision. So in the United States, basically, we have. And it's completely normalized, and foreskin is demonized. And so people accept it, and they get extremely defensive. I had the chance this summer to meet the Bloodstained Men in Gillette, Wyoming, and the antipathy directed and the anger directed toward them was very strong. And all they're saying is like babies shouldn't be circumcised, and people get really defensive about it. And if the argument was like, well, hey, no, circumcision like gives you a 1% reduction of catching AIDS from a female partner if you live in Uganda, no one's going to get worked up about that, right? Oh, there's a 1% chance that you could have phimosis. That's why we do it. Bullshit. That's not why we do it. Like, not like it really kind of bugs me because almost every justification for circumcision is a red herring. That's not the real reason, right? If they came out tomorrow, and by the way, this has just recently happened. PEPFAR, the government program that's going around trying to stop AIDS in Africa, They had an infant circumcision program. They were doing, and they had done, get this, 22 million infant circumcisions in Africa. And they're terminating that program. They're no longer doing it because the botch rate was like 10%. Let me repeat that. The botch rate. They were botching so many of these. And what a botch is could be anything from a complete penile amputation to skin bridges, which, I mean, fuck, just the other day a guy sent me pictures. He had really bad skin bridges. Right? These are real problems. And so they stopped doing it. Are you circumcised? Yes. Working on changing that, though. I'm a bit late. Well, libertarians are okay with circumcision. A lot of libertarians are okay with circumcision. I think all of the libertarian theorists would have defended it, although most didn't take the time to. A lot of them were Jewish. Almost, I think all of them would have been circumcised. Maybe Hayek wasn't. Uh, and so many libertarians are Americans who would also have been circumcised. And if if they didn't just buy into all of the hype about circumcision, they would buy into the parental authority to do it. Because they would probably argue, hey, parents have a wide latitude to do what they want. This is an interesting thing with Rothbard, right? So he didn't think parents had any obligation towards their children, but on the other hand, he thought they had complete control, right? That you don't owe your children anything, but if you want to do whatever you want to them, you can. And I don't see how you can have responsibility, how you can have authority and power but no responsibility. It's like basically he was couching the parent as in exactly the same position as the state vis-a-vis the person, where it has complete power but no obligation. Um, but, but, but. A lot of Ivy League grads are not really smart. Absolutely true. A lot of them aren't. A lot of them are legacies. I also just found out from my Harvard twink, he was telling me how they have a whole program at Harvard where if you are from a wealthy family who basically bought your way into the school, which is like a third of the student body, that uh, the first year or the first semester you're at Harvard, your grades don't count because the Harvard doesn't have the hardest classes in the country. There are other schools that might have more challenging programs, but it does have a challenging course set. It is difficult. They are hard classes. So a lot of these legacy people aren't going to do very well, especially in that first year. So that first year, they just don't count their grades. It isn't listed in the GPAs. They don't put it in their student averages. It's just a gimme year for all their rich kids. There's a whole program they have for it. And then what they do is at the end of the year, if it's clear that you're not going to cut it, you're gone. If you're just going to be an embarrassment to Harvard, they'll get you out of there. But they will try, and they have a lot of one-on-one training, more than most other schools. They will try and get it to where, okay, you won't be a doctor, but here's a program you can study in, and we think that you can manage this. So they work very, very hard to give out those Harvard degrees to people who are rich enough to pay for them. They also will go and find kids who are gifted and talented and who are very smart, who are actually exceptional kids, and they will give them scholarships, or they'll get them to come, and then those are the ones they put forward, and everyone thinks, oh, a Harvard kid is a prodigy who speaks 8 languages and blah, 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 when actually that's the shell, that's the veneer, and underneath is a bunch of rich kids. They're smart rich kids. They're not getting dumbasses typically. These are smart kids, but they would be the smart kid at any high school across the country. They wouldn't be the smartest kid you ever met or anything like that. And they're not. The one I had over last night is not the smartest person I ever met, but not by a long shot. Did suck dick really well, though. From what I understand, he says that libertarians are against circumcision. No libertarian parties that I know of have any stance on circumcision. It is not widely debated in libertarian circles. It has just not been considered a libertarian issue. I think that they have a lot of insights on this issue, though. I think that they're receptive to it. Among my audience, it seems like most of them are anti-circumcision. I think that the intactivist arguments resonate with most libertarians, and so I think that it could become a libertarian issue. Hell, I don't think it would hurt them at this point. How could it hurt them? They couldn't go any lower anyway. Did, The brothers would at least have to be the same age. Well, we were talking about twins. So if two gay twins or twin brothers who are gay wanted to have sex, would that be wrong? And well, you say the same age, but what if they're both adults, right? I mean, if one's 20 and one's 22, what's the problem, right? They're gay brothers, and like there are gay brothers. I've met gay brothers, and there's gay twins, and there's gay twins who fuck each other. They're out there. Most gay twins don't fuck each other, but they do exist, and you might, I mean, it could violate some of your sensibilities, but there's not going to be any incest from that. It's definitely voluntary. Where's the victim? Where's the crime? If you want to say there's some kind of moral outrage about it or whatever, and you want to argue against it or persuade against it, that's okay. I don't have a problem with that. But to consider it a crime, that's going too far. Um, Two brothers having sex with each other is weird, gross, but not affecting me. But why? Okay, but why? Like, so let's say two guys are having sex with each other. You could say that's weird and gross too, and I understand that. But let's just say that's okay, but if they're brothers, it's not okay. Why? Uh, Gays around the world want to know. But the baby didn't agree to come into the womb. It did not ask to be alive. No, it didn't. But presumably it wants to live, right? This is where the fiduciary responsibility. You can't assume that it's going to be suicidal. You can't assume that it has a death wish. You can't assume that it's going to be miserable. It exists, and we know that just like we know that most babies are not going to want to get circumcised, right? It's only 1%. Most babies are not going to want to commit suicide either. So we can't assume that, well, it would want this. Uh, I think Rothbard's stance on children's rights is regarded as his worst libertarian analysis. Yeah, it's really bad. It's quite terrible. I don't know if there's something there or if he just made a mistake. I think a lot of people just kind of view children as the property of their parents, and or as subhumans in some sense, and I just don't think that really makes sense. And it's just really weird that you would say a parent, because Rothbard would also argue a parent could circumcise their children, a parent could force their children to, how to dress, where to go to school, when to, to make them do chores, right? That they could treat them like chattel, essentially. I think he even talks about like selling children. But then the parents have no obligation at all, right? That they have complete control, but they have no duty at all. And I just don't see how you can. I mean, there's a whole school of thought that you can't have an obligation without a duty. I think that he's completely wrong there. I think the parent now I do I people debate child parent obligations. I think that parents do have obligations to their children. I do not think that children have obligations to their parents, at least vis-a-vis being children. Now, there can be a point you're an independent person, you're on your own man, and your parents give you a loan. Well, you owe your parents money then, you know. But I don't think that children are obligated to their parents. I think it's the other way around. I don't think that obligation is without limits, though, either, right? So, we had this case. I think it might even still be ongoing. He's like 35. He lives at home, and his parents are trying to evict him, and he's trying to stay. Um, there's a point where the parents are like, look, we did our part. We raised him. He's alive. He's healthy. We did, we satisfied the theoretical libertarian limit of a parent's obligation to the child. So be it. And I actually would tend to think, in my personal opinion, that the obligation is less than most people think. All right. So I don't think it should be 18. I think it should be when the kid can take care of himself, which is going to be closer to 13, in my opinion, for most people. What are your beliefs on private corporations like YouTube pushing their personal beliefs on individual content creators? So I think it's stupid, but I also think they have a right. I'm a big believer in the freedom of association. And if YouTube wants to set who can talk or who cannot talk on their platform, I think they have the right to do that. The problem is when they get a regulation where they become a utility, where they prevent competition and they become a de facto arm of the state. They haven't done that yet. Sounds like they kind of want to. It doesn't. Uh, in the long scheme of things, it's likely to happen. In the short term, we don't know. Uh, as long as they can't prevent competition from, like, as long as people can create others to compete with them, it's not as bad. So no, I'm a big. And the other problem I have is, like, I believe in freedom of association, and I'll be like, look, YouTube doesn't have to put up my videos. They don't have to put up Steven Crowder's videos. They can say, hey, it's our platform. Now, if they have a contract with them that's different, they have to honor that contract or face the, or suffer the consequences of violating the contract. But they could put it in there in such a way that they could de facto get rid of people they don't like. That's fine. What I don't like, though, is almost all the people who will cite that are hypocrites, right? All these liberals who are like, it's a private company and they can do what they want, are the same people who would be like, you better bake a cake for that fucking faggot or else you're going to go to prison, right? So they believe in freedom of association when their political enemies are getting ostracized, but they don't believe in freedom of association when they're trying to force their political agenda down people. And I am just consistent about it. I think that the bakers shouldn't have to bake for the whoever. I mean, they can for whoever. I don't care. They can be a racist baker for all I give a shit. They say, we don't serve black people. Okay, it's not great business. You're gonna get boycotted, but you know what? It is your fucking business. You didn't become a slave because you started a business. You didn't become obligated to my sense of social justice or anyone else's for that matter. Your only duty is to yourself and to the contracts that you sign. And so I'm just consistent about it. Do you believe animals have rights? If so, what rights and why? If not, why and why not? So I don't believe that they have rights. What I do think, though, is that many animals have value. So it's something like a killer whale. So super intelligent mammal, amazing animal, right? Uh, I don't know that they have rights. Look, in the wild, they're constantly murdering other animals. Right? Like, they're called killer whales because they fucking murder other animals. So you can feel sorry for fucking Keiko or whatever, but in the wild, Keiko kills baby seals and baby whales and baby fish and great. Humans are supposedly terrible because they kill great white sharks. Well, guess what? Fucking killer whales kill great white sharks, and they kill baby gray whales, and they kill humpback whales, and they kill blue whales, and they kill seals, and they're pretty ruthless about it. And they also get killed, right? They get killed by other whales. They starve to death. It's a nasty, brutal life. I was just watching a video the other day of an eagle eating a snake, and it was pretty. It sucked to be that snake. It's clamped down on these talons, and the snake is pulling out its guts from the back. And every time it pulls its guts out, it like a accordion, like squeezes the snake together, and it would rip its like intestines, and then the snake would try and wiggle away, and like, okay, that really sucks. And so but that's just the fucking reality of the world, and it's not my fault or humanity's fault. It's certainly not capitalism's fault. And so the animals that exist in that context, it's tooth and claw. And the thing is, what I would say is, I value them. So I look at an orca and I say, I don't want to see that in a little pool. Am I going to make it a crime? No, I'm just not going to go there. And I'm going to tell people, look, this is not how I don't want to see them. Don't go there. Like, so boycott, and that's actually effective. Like SeaWorld is getting rid of their killer whales. It's gonna happen. It is happening, and it's happening without regulation, because the public is basically saying, look, we don't like to see this, so they don't need to pass a law. Um, but no, I don't think that they have rights, not in the same way that we do. Maybe one day we'll have a conversation with a killer whale and we can discuss this with them. That would be awesome. But that's a ways away still. The evictionist stance is that you can only rip it out when it's viable. But people are using an evictionist argument to justify abortion today when that is what's happening. And the evictionists, I mean, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think evictionists are saying this is only allowed when this is viable. They're just they're coming up with a reason to justify abortion and then just leaving it there. Abortion has now been justified by evictionism, and then they're just going and ripping the arms off. But like I said, I don't have a problem with evicting it. You know, oh, we have an artificial womb, or we can surrogacy put it in another woman, and it's fine, and it'll be healthy. Fair enough. I don't have too much of a problem with that. But the parent's obligation to that child still exists, right? The real scandal is the pedophile was entrenched with the elite, not that someone killed him. Yeah, that's true too. Right, and Bill Clinton took 26 flights on a plane. I see how can you know that? Bill Clinton in planes, right? One second he's landing on the tarmac to talk to the attorney general, and then his wife is conspicuously not charged with a crime. And the next minute he's flying 26 times to Epstein's fucking pedophile island. But he didn't see anything wrong, and he didn't do anything. And we all know that Bill Clinton has no sexual impropriety whatsoever. So in the future, you'll be able to evict a baby at any time pregnancy because of tech. Okay, I agree that that's true. Technically speaking, that does not eliminate the obligation of the parent to the child, though. Mm, I agree. Should be applied across the board, but I think that less sweeping of an effect than you suggest. That could imply anything from killing anyone smarter than you. Uh, Bless you for sneezing. Thank you, Lisa. Uh, How do you change the fact that you are circumcised? So watch my videos on foreskin restoration. You can never become uncut, right? You've been cut, you can't uncut, but you can repair a lot of the damage. You can regrow your foreskin. It's not perfect, but it's actually pretty effective. The skin over time can regrow to cover the glands. In terms of appearance, they will look basically the same. They'll look enough that I can't tell the difference, and I have seen a lot of both. And then the function, you'll have more sensation. How much more varies, but probably quite a bit for most people. And you'll have more function. You'll be able to use it the way that an uncut guy would use it for the most part. It's not 100%, but it's pretty good. I have a video, if you're interested, titled see, Uncut, Cut, Restored, One Man's Perspective, where I interview a guy who was circumcised in adulthood and then restored his foreskin later in adulthood. So he had sex both as an intact man, as a cut man, and as a restored man. So that's a very interesting perspective. There's not many guys you can find who have done that. I mean, most of the guys who restore, like they were cut, but they were cut like when they were babies, so they don't remember. So there's actually quite a bit you can do. It takes time, but it's not expensive and not necessarily difficult. I've actually been doing like this entire video. I've got a device on that's restoring my foreskin. Galatians 5:1-6 tells us that those circumcised become debtors to keep the whole law. They are entangled in the yoke of bondage. Okay, is Galatians in the New Testament or in the Old Testament? Forgive me, I'm not a Bible scholar. What's interesting is when it is referred to in the Bible, circumcision is either referred to as a covenant with God and this, thing, or like a humiliation that you do to your enemy. So Abraham does it to himself and to his son, and oh, look, we're showing our covenant of God, but also like when they would defeat enemies at the battlefield to like degrade them, they would do it. One thing though that the Bible doesn't say is they never say this is prophylactic. They're never saying, "Oh, God wants you to circumcise because it's healthy and you all lower your chances of getting HPV or syphilis or HIV." That's never claimed. In fact, the whole reason that you do a sacrifice or something is because you're losing something valuable and it's risky. You're showing your devotion by doing something that is risky, that you're putting your life at risk. You don't show your devotion by like, oh, I got vaccinated to show my devotion. No, that's not why. You don't show your devotion by having something that's harmless and beneficial for you done to you. Uh, and yet people only want to question the qualifications minorities who are accepted at Harvard University through affirmative action, and yet you have all these legacy kids at Harvard. Yeah, so the main thing isn't like the affirmative action, although that's definitely a thing. It's the legacies. One wonders if maybe like their legacy parents have done a lot to make it, oh, let's have a controversy about the black kids going here instead of all the guys from Martha's Vineyard and Cape Beacon Hill who go there. Do you recommend libertarians move or buy property in New Hampshire for the Free State Project? Well, I did, so yes, of course. Now, everyone's personally different. I don't think people are obligated to move to New Hampshire, and I certainly can understand people whose situation doesn't make it a good idea, but I think it is a good idea. Look, it's something effective that you can do. It's interesting. New Hampshire is a great state for lots of reasons. I love living here. And there's a whole networking community. There's an active, like I mean, if you believe in politics, there's a lot of libertarians who are elected to the state house. Now, they're not in the Libertarian Party, they're Democrats and Republicans, but they're like free staters. They're anarchists, a lot of them. Hardcore libertarians who are in the state government. I was just watching, there was a compilation of people giving speeches there calling taxation theft. And this is having an effect. The Free Staters are already enough to swing elections in New Hampshire already. I mean, in the last presidential election, Hillary Clinton won by 1,400 votes. The population of Free Staters who live in New Hampshire is probably in the 3,000 to 4,000 range. So, it's already the margin of victory. It's already been the margin of victory in mayoral elections and in lots of district elections. So, uh, yes, there's a lot more going, and that's only if you're into politics. If you're not into politics, which I'm not, right? I never voted for any of that stuff. Uh, it's just a social thing. You're going and you're persuading more and more. You're radicalizing the locals, and it's good. Yeah, I recommend people do it, or at least check it out. At least go to PorcFest and see how you like it, or Freedom, or what's the one they do in the winter? Freedom Fest. They have a couple events every year that I recommend people go to first. I would guess that Rothbard's stance on kids might be related to the culture at the time. Probably, probably. Someone would make the argument that there is no potential right to life, but if you asked whether you could mutilate the child, remove arm and leg in the womb, they would be opposed. This is weird when you have intactivists who are pro-choice or pro-abortion. So you have these people who vehemently defend abortion, but vehemently condemn circumcision. And it's like, oh, okay, so let's say we went into the womb and we circumcised the baby. They'd be like, oh no, you can't do that. But like, well, what if instead of circumcising it, we fucking killed it? They'd be like, yeah, that's fine, right? It's very, it shows that those people probably don't have a very precise, thought out, principled, non-contradictory, ethics or morality that they're going to invoke. Uh, but it's very, like, circumcision in general kind of does that, because if you go to parents and people say, hey, should you be able to tattoo your newborn infant? They'd be like, no, of course not. No, that's forever. You can't just tattoo your baby. Like, should you be able to tattoo his penis? And they'd be like, no, of course not. Like, should you be able to cut off part of his penis? Like, yeah, of course, obviously. Right. So that doesn't illustrate that there's some cognitive dissonance there. I don't know what will, because that is most people's position, right? Most people will say you cannot tattoo your baby. You certainly cannot tattoo your baby's penis, but you can cut off part of the penis. Now, a lot of this is justified based on a lot of misnomers. So a lot of people think that the foreskin is just a flap of skin. It's extra skin. It's like clipping toenails or fingernails, or it's like cutting hair, right? They use all this trivializing language, and even the medical profession. So the medical profession is like, when they describe how to do a circumcision, like, well, you do this, and then you remove the quote extra skin, the extra skin, and again, in what sense is it extra? Like, we could just uh, describe a female circumcision in the most blasé way and be like, well, now cut off the extra clitoris or the extra clitoral hood. It doesn't justify the act by adding the word extra in front of it. But that is actually a real common rhetorical device you see. But a lot of people are just ignorant. A lot of people have never seen a foreskin. They don't know how they work. They don't know what they're for. They don't know. You got a lot of women who will say they prefer cut dicks, who have never seen an uncut dick or had any experience with an uncut dick, when actually, like, this is an evolutionary point. The way we are is because women have been they've been doing sexual selection on partners they preferred, and the partners they preferred, historically speaking, not just historically, evolutionarily speaking, have been men with foreskins. Men with foreskins that completely cover the heads of their penis and very often have overhang. Like, women apparently like that because they've been picking that. We did not evolve to lose foreskins. They've started to be removed for cultural, religious reasons in the last few thousand years, and then only among a minority of the population. Uh, and there's a whole, this isn't my thing, but you can go look. Their entire websites by women dedicated to how much they prefer uncut dicks. Now you put that on the balance with a bunch of women who have never experienced an uncut dick, but just know that it quote looks weird or is unusual or whatever. Uh, and then the social pressures that come with that, like, oh, that's weird to be like that, to like that. It's weird, it's shady, it's hidden, blah blah blah. So that's all cultural, right? Because women in Europe don't feel that way. So you're looking to suing the hospital where you circumcised his baby. I'm so far past the statute of limitations that would never fly. Although I do know that the doctor who probably circumcised me just retired, so I should probably call him and ask him what's up. But see, I don't feel a lot of antipathy because I don't think that they weren't being malicious. They were doing what they thought was best practices. Same thing with the same way. Poe the person, when I talked to her about this, says, you want to think that your parents are doing what they think is best for you, and they do think that. Now, the reasons they do it are really bad. They don't make a lot of sense. They don't fall under any scrutiny, but they're being told by their doctors, especially when I was born in the 80s. There was very little dissent on it back then, right? Everybody said you had to do it, that it was the best thing to do. So it wasn't like, oh, we want to retard him sexually and eliminate all this pleasure that he'll now never feel, and that's our goal. That's not their goal. That was the goal of like the doctors who popularized circumcision, or at least many of them, not all of them. But that was 100 years, 120 years before I was born, so they didn't know any of that. uh, Kind of random. I like the video you did on Switzerland. Well, Switzerland's a cool country. Does YouTube receive government subsidies? I don't think any more so than normal companies do. But this changes as they seek regulations. You have Facebook going and seeking regulations. A lot of these, this is kind of a really indicative kind of a case type of how this happens, because they'll never come out and say we want regulations to make ourselves richer or to solve problems that we can't solve. They'll go and be like, this is for consumer protection. And so someone like Facebook or YouTube, maybe they're having a problem policing their content. There's a problem with content being created on their platforms that is causing them legal problems. Rather than having to develop systems that would address that and police that on their own, it would make sense to just go to the government and say, okay, you do it. So then they externalize that entire cost, right? So instead of them having to monitor what's going on, the government will do it for them. So it, it removes that burden from their hands. And then also it will probably come with it a whole bunch of regulations that will basically make it impossible for a new company to compete with them, which is what they would really want. Oh my God, I can't keep up with all these guys. Sorry guys, I'm trying to read the comments and I got way behind. Try to give me 5 stars. Oh, well, okay. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, if you guys go to the podcast, I put a link to the Apple. There's also I'll put another link later to another place where they're posted. I think there's 4 or 5 episodes off. There is going to be different content on there. Sometimes I'll make stuff that will be on the YouTube channel and the podcast. I'm going to put stuff that's just on the podcast. I already know that there are certain topics that YouTube's going to flag. If I make anything about Zionism or the Holocaust, it's going to come off YouTube. It's not going to go here. So it's going to go on the podcast. So I'm still going to do both until YouTube gets rid of the channel, if they ever do, which they very well may not. I'm going to keep putting content here. I'm also going to be putting content on the podcast. since there isn't a ton on the podcast right now, I am going to go back and add a lot of stuff that I've covered here. So gun control videos, circumcision videos, restoration videos. And I want to start doing videos on anarcho-syndicalism again, anarcho-communism. I've done YouTube videos on that years ago, like in 2012, 2013, but I'd like to do it again because it's a really fascinating topic. And I just want to put content on the podcast. So right now, the thing I signed up for allowed me to put 3 hours of material up a month, and I'm probably going to exceed that. So I'm probably going to get the higher plan. I don't know if there's an unlimited one or not. So right now I'm shelling out money to do that. So you're all welcome. But that's free, so you don't have to pay for that. That's just there. Go ahead if you like them, listen and share and spread, right? Because there's it's new, so there's not a ton of people on there now. They're getting some downloads, but it's not a ton at this point. So, and I mean, even if you all did, it wouldn't be a ton because there's not that many of you. But yeah, check out the link in the description. So there's going to be different content there. So it's not going to be like you listen to everything twice. There'll be stuff there that's not here, and vice versa. They're going to be parallel. There'll be some things that are the same, but there will be differences. Oh man, I am missing so many comments, guys. I don't know if I can catch up with all these. So there was an animal rights question. Oh God. Sorry. So I'm really apologizing. I have to skip a lot of these because a lot of this is you guys talking to each other, which is fine. Government is becoming more authoritarian, and in the future, government will be dominated by people who don't believe in freedom of speech. Having government take over the online platforms would be the worst. Yes, I absolutely agree. Total non-starter, terrible idea. This is classic. You imagine that they're gonna. Oh, Donald Trump does it. I trust it because he's gonna really put it to the libs. Yeah, and then when Elizabeth Warren gets into office, what do you think she's gonna do? Right. So no, they absolutely can't be trusted with that kind of power. Uh, duh, duh, duh. Somebody posted about Galatians. Pop out. It doesn't say participate, toggle time scripts, send feedback. It doesn't say. And if you guys have problems with the podcast, like if it doesn't work or if it's not downloading or if you can't rate it, send me a message somehow just so I know and I can start to look into it. Uh, there have been little problems so far, but they've been kind of just little mistakes I made, not big deals. Let's see. So people are asking me about Zionism. So, you know, Zionism has a rich philosophical history. There's more than one type of Zionist. There's more than one type of Zionist ideology, and there's certain types of it which I don't really have a problem with because there were Zionists who were like, we just want to move there, we just want to buy land, we want to do it voluntarily, we want to, we want Jews to live there, we want there to be a happy Jewish community there, but we don't want to get rid of anybody else. We don't want to kick the Arabs out. We don't want it to be Jews only, and we don't want it to be dominated by Jews. In fact, and it wasn't always about a Jewish state, right? There's plenty of Zionists who weren't really talking about a Jewish state. They might have only wanted to live on their own kibbutzim or live in a commonwealth with the Arabs. There were definitely Zionists who believed that. And I don't have that. Doesn't sound too bad to me. In fact, that's not too dissimilar than the Free State Project, right? I'm an immigrant. I moved to an area with a whole bunch of other people who agreed with me, and so in a ways that's like the libertarian Zionism. Okay, I don't have a problem with that. But that is only a small part of Zionism. The main dominant part of Zionism, the part that has won out, the part that became the state of Israel, is the nationalist Jewish, imperium one, the belief in a Jewish state. Now, first of all, and I've told this to one of my Jewish friends, I'm like, look, I'm an anarchist. I've been an anarchist for 15 years. How could I be in favor of a nationalist statist ideology? I don't favor a state in the United States. I don't favor a state in Norway. I don't favor a state in China or Russia or Germany. And I don't favor a state in Israel. I don't favor a state for Jews. I don't favor a state for anyone. And so, I don't know how I'm supposed to be sympathetic for this. Now, there's this kind of critique of, well, there's lots of bad states. Is Israel so bad? And I'm like, well, that's true. There certainly are states that are worse than Israel. I mean, the United States plausibly could be considered worse. China could be plausibly considered worse. Definitely considered worse. Russia, right? There's a bunch of states, but Israel is not a nice place. They are hypocritical in so many ways. They want to pretend that they're a democracy. They're not. They're an apartheid state. They have a two-tiered system. You have the Jews on top, and you have everybody else beneath. And there's some gradations there. So, like Druze and Christian Arabs are higher than Muslim Arabs, for instance. And even within the Jewish hierarchy, you have Ashkenazis and Sephardic, and then your Ethiopian Jews. They're not quite so high up on the totem pole. Um, so it's a nationalistic apartheid state. They're no friend of the United States. They take advantage of the United States constantly, and they have, and I said this in if you saw the book review I did for the summer, when I read The Prime Ministers, which is written by Yehuda Avner, a guy who was an interpreter and speechwriter for 4 different Israeli prime ministers. It's very clear that most of them, with maybe the exception of Yitzhak Rabin, they basically thought that Jewish life was more important than all other life. Which isn't to say that they hated Gentiles. They didn't necessarily. Well, some of them probably did, but they didn't necessarily think, like the Talmud says, that every Gentile is like a snake that deserves their head to be crushed. But Menachem Begum thought that it was okay to kill Gentiles for political reasons. If you were going to engage in political terrorism, killing Gentiles was fine, but killing Jews was not fine. Killing Jews was never okay, according to Menachem Begum. And the way Avner makes it sound is like this is a virtue. Like, wow, this prime minister is such a principled guy. He would never kill another Jew, but he would ruthlessly murder any non-Jew as long as they got in the way. And we're supposed to. I mean, the idea, the book is a hagiography towards him. It's almost like we're supposed to really respect him. Like, how can I respect him? He would fucking murder me in a second if he thought it was to the advantage of a Jew. But if I was Jewish, then he would never do such a thing. So now, that type of tribalism, by the way, is not unique to Jews. There's lots of groups that have that. That's just a very common bigotry. The problem is that's not the way people in the West think. That's not the way I think. That's not most people in the West. That's not the way, and this kind of the weird thing is like you find that a lot in sub-Saharan Africa. You find that among Arab cultures, or maybe in South Asia or East Asia. That's a real common attitude among lots of Native Americans, right? It's a cliche that lots of Native American groups, they have a name. The word for their tribe is we're real people, and everyone else is, something else. They're less than that. Well, Jews are like that, and they're not unique in that sense. But what is unusual is that after their Semitic Middle Eastern origins, they have kind of re-exported or come back out of the West, where there's this much more universal and liberal view, like to treat people more equally and not to be like everyone who's outside of my group is trash for me to get rid of, right? And they don't jive with it very well. So it's it's a revolting. I mean, I just hate it, And like, are there worse states? Absolutely. Are there problems with the Arab states around them? Absolutely. But then the mendaciousness of the way that they couch the argument, like, oh, we're just peaceful and we just wanted to move here, and then those stupid bloodthirsty Arabs, they just attacked us for no reason. Like, no, you were moving there with the explicit purpose. Okay, not every Zionist, but the majority and the most powerful ones were moving there with the explicit purpose of creating a Jewish state that would be either only Jews, where they would expel all non-Jews, something they openly attempted to do many times, and many of them still to this day will say this is a goal, or at the very least, Jewish dominated and non-Jews relegated to, menial tasks as an underclass. Very, very similar to a certain ideology called Lebensraum that was instituted against the Slavs in Eastern Europe. So, uh, And what's mendacious about it is that they will say that, they have said that many times, not all of them, but many of them, that they want basically what we would call ethnic cleansing and or genocide. And then when the Arabs say, hey, you genociding, it's like, no, 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 we're not doing that. You all ran away on your own. The Nakba only happened because all the Arabs just got afraid and decided to leave. It had nothing to do with the Aragon or the Stern Gang or the Haganah going around and, threatening to kill. So is very frustrating, very annoying, and it's also very annoying that so many nationalists in America. It's like they have a vicarious nationalism via Israel that's really weird and really annoying. So no, I'm not as look. There's good there are good strains of Zionists. There are good people in Israel. I know good libertarians in Israel. I have friends in Israel. There's plenty of people in Israel who are good people who are not Likudnik Zionists or whatnot. And then, like I said, there historically were good Zionists, and there's lots of good Jews. For most of the Jews in the United States are not ever going to move to Israel. They don't want to move to Israel. They might still be Zionists in some nominal sense, but yeah. Sorry, that's gonna get me off YouTube though. Talk like that. Duh, duh, duh. Yeah, Zionism's church and state thing is really weird too, because most of the secular Ashkenazi Jews who founded the state of Israel were secular. They were atheists. They Hebraized their names. Most of them didn't have those Hebrew-sounding names. They were Eastern European, Polish names or whatnot. Um, and like they don't believe in the Bible. Like they really don't think that any of that's literally true. Many of them, anyway. And yet they will found like the foundational claim is like, well, the Bible says so. And you get the fucking Charlie Kirks of the world. Oh, it's just like if some Native American comes out and says, "Look, here is our religious text that says that Connecticut belongs to the Pequot Indians," nobody would say, "Well, they have the right to take it." But the Pequot Indians were only kicked out, 400 years ago, and it's funny too because I've heard Charlie Kirk say something like, "Look, there's all these other Arab countries. The Palestinians can just go to the Arab countries." Well, the idea that the people who live in Palestine are fungible with the people who live in, Libya or wherever else is kind of silly. But would you say we should kick out every non-Native American from Connecticut just so that the Pequot can have that one state? They can just move. There's 49 other states. That would just sound so fucking ridiculous. But the Pequot have a better claim to Connecticut than the Zionists did to Israel. Now, the facts on the ground thing is kind of true, though, because you have all these Israelis who have been born there now. They grew up there. I don't want to kick them out. I don't want to have them be destroyed. But and here's the other thing. The argument that a state is necessary to protect them. I think that in the nuclear age especially, putting all the Jews in one spot is pretty much the fucking dumbest thing you could do if you're worried about Jews getting annihilated. If you're really worried about Jews getting annihilated, then what you want is the Jews to be spread out as much as possible. Because if they're all in one tiny little state, you're just one nuke away from worse than the Holocaust. One nuke away from worse than the Holocaust. Why why would you want that? Doesn't make any sense. So everyone go to the Torah Jews Against Zionism, Facebook page because they're pretty good. And lest I be accused, look, not all Jews are Zionists. There's lots of good Jews who don't see the world as Jews and non-Jews and don't think that the Jews have extra powers or moral weight than everybody else. Menachem Begin thought that, and lots of Israeli prime ministers or people think that, but lots of Jews don't. So those are the Norman Finkelsteins of the world, Max Blumenthal's, right? The Sheldon Richmond's. There's plenty of Jews who don't believe in Jewish supremacy, and then those Jews get labeled as anti-Semites pretty much uniformly. Yeah, Charlie Kirk is a piece of shit. Were you ever sexually attracted to Ryan Falk? I'm not going to answer that. Yeah, I clicked 3 vertical dots, but it didn't expand anything. What traits do humans possess that endow them with rights that animals don't? So an ability to reason, abstract thinking, uh, and a the ability uh, for those rights to be respected within the species at least. Uh, Now, other animals do have ways of communicating that are probably more complex than we understand, and do have property norms. I did a whole video on the territorial imperative. So there's pretty strong evidence that a lot of animals, especially social animals, um, have organizations, but do they understand rights? We don't know. Also, there's an argument that intraspecies violations aren't the same as interspecies. Jeez, can't keep up with these. Do you consider yourself men going the other way? No, I'm gay. That's for like men who want to date women. Yes, Syrians are more Semitic than Jews. Arabs are more Semitic than Jews. They're all Semitic languages. The Jews are so European at this point. I know there's an argument that there's some kind of genetic connection there, but I mean, look at they got white skin. They were speaking Yiddish up until a generation ago. Um, you were talking Native Americans, and it reminded me of Russell Means, the libertarian Native American who pushed for a libertarian state award, Wyoming. That so yeah, I'm familiar with Russell Means. He's a good, famous actor too. He was in Last of the Mohicans as Chingachgook. He voiced Pocahontas's dad in the Disney movie. But he declared. I don't know if you're talking about Free State Wyoming, which was pushed by Boston Tea Party, or if you're talking about the Lakota Republic, which was apparently some kind of scam. But the idea was the Lakota would declare a republic basically in the high plains of the United States that would be uh, um, like a libertarian republic, but it was like a they were issuing silver coins, but it was like a scam. He toured a stream. Let's see. Have you heard about what is happening in Virginia with respect to gun control? So not details. Apparently, so the Democrats have come to power there, and they've said something along the lines of elections have consequences, and they're proposing some type of gun control. I don't know how much or what, but there's apparently some very organized resistance to that. And we're going to see. This is something we've seen in a number of other states, Connecticut, Washington. So we're getting these states that are passing gun control laws because they managed to get a Democratic, majority in the House or whatever. And literally some large proportion, maybe even half the state will be like, this is not happening. This happened in Washington state. And we're like half the sheriff said, we will not do this. We will not enforce this law. Similar when Connecticut passed a ban on, AR-15s and a couple other weapons. The compliance rate they think is like less than 1%, even in New Jersey. And there was circulated a letter, I know Connecticut, a letter circulated among the state police basically saying anyone who tries to enforce this law, who goes around trying to confiscate these guns, will be shot and deserves to be shot. And so you should just not enforce it for your own good. And the person this letter was circulated publicly, the man who wrote it was, not an alias or whatever, and nothing was done. It was just kind of like, okay. So I think what we have here is very delusional Democrats who, they don't appreciate guns. They don't like guns. They think they're stupid. They think there's no reason to own them. They can't understand their significance, and they think, hey, we have political power. We're going to pass the law. Fair enough, but a lot of people don't give a fuck what you pass. All right, they honestly believe these are rights, and they're mad as hell, and they're going to organize, and they're not going to let this happen. It doesn't even happen. in like liberal states like Washington State, like Connecticut, state like Virginia. Yes, you've got this big Alexandria metro area that's full of all these Washington commuters, right? These big government liberals, these Pentagon pansies. But they're going to pass a law and it's going to be resisted. It was resisted in New York. Did you ever see when they passed their gun ban? Upstate New York, like the attorney general sent all these guys to go explain, okay, here's the law. You have to turn these in. You have to register them. Like, we're not doing it. This is not going to happen. Yeah, the Lakota Republic. So I remember the Lakota Republic. Uh, I, it appears to have been something of a scam because they were, well, at least the Lakota silver dollars were scams. Because I remember it was like, there'll be a national bank for the Lakota Republic. It will be based on silver. There'll be a vault in the Black Hills, and it'll be guarded by 1,200 Lakota warriors, and blah blah blah. And like it all sounded good. They did actually mint these really nice looking coins with like an Indian with long hair, whatever. So, but Republic of Lakota didn't go anywhere. As Free State Wyoming also did not go anywhere. Although Wyoming is a wonderful state, having just spent a couple months there. If you could wave a magic wand that would make all humans incapable of committing one logical fallacy, what would it be? Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't know. I'll think about it. Yeah, it's funny how Democrats want the government to take the guns away but hate Trump. Yeah, Trump is literally Hitler. Trump is a Nazi. Trump is the worst president ever. By the way, let's give up our guns. Well, how does that make any sense? This is why registration comes before bans. Yes. This is why people oppose registration, because registration has no effect on crime. There's nothing registration will do that will reduce the homicide rate. It is only an initial step to a confiscation or taxes or some other kind of regulation. That's the only purpose for them, and that's why people, what's the big deal? Why not register them? Because the only reason you would register them is to subsequently either tax them or restrict them or to take them. Canada's getting new gun control. Not surprised there. Trudeau, wasn't famously an NRA member. Do, do, do. Do you think background checks at gun stores are what? I mean, we have them. Uh, are linked to government lists somewhere. So technically, the NICS background checks are not supposed to be saved. They're supposed to be deleted. I do not trust that at all. However, since you don't have to do a background check on private sales, it is going it is not going to work as a registration, because the second they start doing that, they'll admit that they were lying the whole time, which will cause some problems. But the main problem is people will say, "Oh, no, I sold my guns to so and so at a gun show," and what's going to happen is like 100 million people are going to say that, and there's going to be a big problem, right? There's too much plausible deniability. So I believe, it's my belief, that when they instituted the NICS background check, it was the first step in what was going to be a series of steps that would have resulted in a national registry, and they just did not take the subsequent steps. There was too much backlash. The NRA did a good job in the 90s of stopping that from happening. The culture shifted away from tolerating that. There was just a big backlash, and they just have been very intransigent on new gun control at the federal level ever since then. Uh, do you buy all your guns through private sales? If not, would you suggest doing so? No, I buy both, but I would suggest doing so. Like, there's no, like, most states it's legal, so you're not breaking a law to do that, and then there is literally no paper trail. Now, the little paper trail that there is not the end of the world, but no paper trail is better than a little paper trail. So I do recommend that. But I don't fret. I've bought from private from dealers, licensed dealers before, and it's fine. You can do both. But if you don't want a paper trail, that's fine. And there's a big market for that. That's not that hard to do. You can find people who are willing to sell, especially if you live in certain areas. I'm kind of curious. Do we know more about what's going on in Virginia specifically? Like, what did they ban? Let me check that. Virginia gun control. I'm kind of curious. I saw a little bit. New Virginia gun control. Okay, that's Mike Bloomberg. When Virginia passes these background checks for family members, what? Virginia counties declare they won't abide by new gun control. Is that legal? So I did not even read that, and yet that is the pattern that's happening 3 days ago. Let me check this one out. This is exactly what's going to happen. The, the the proportion of the country that wants to take guns is not law. Let me put this. The proportion of the country that wants to take guns is not large enough to take the guns from the portion of the country that doesn't want to give them up. It's just that simple. So what they want to try and do is have policies where they can shrink the proportion of the population, right? If they can get it, if right now it's around 50%, some people say 40, some people say 35, right? But there's this third to a half of the population that has guns. If they could shrink that to like 15, 20%, they could probably knuckle down big time. But they've just not been able to do that so far. Uh, bu- 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 Would you still be for freedom if it resulted in totally if it resulted in lower standards of living? Uh, so I think the question needs to be more specific. So like how much lower and how much of a total obstruction of freedom. So let's say, um, yeah, like I would be willing to pay a lower standard of living for some liberty. If you were going to say, oh, you'll be completely impoverished and like destitute, probably not. But I don't think that's what's at stake. Uh, yeah, so the NRA is compromised a lot. Like the NRA is not the best gun rights organization. It's a very moderate gun rights organization, but that doesn't mean that they haven't done good things, and they have done good things. They're just not right about everything. Um, uh, how much did your strength suffer from the few months of off lifting? Yes, 5 months without lifting, and I'm still figuring that out. Obviously, I'm back to DOMS. Like when you've been lifting for a while, you don't ever really ache. You feel fine. And now it's like just even a moderate workout, I feel like shit for like 2 or 3 days. Um, I can do the same weight, but at many fewer reps. So like for deadlifts, if I'm going to deadlift, I could always do like my working sets were in 315 for deadlifts, and I would be doing like 4 sets of like 4, 5, 6, and now it's like 1, 1, 1, maybe 2. So it's significant. It's significant. Are they saving nicks? Why do they want nicks on private sales? I think that like they say they're not saving nicks, and maybe they're not. It wouldn't also surprise me if they were planning on saving nicks and they just lost them because they're fucking inept. But they are not saving private sales. So, I mean, you're not even doing them for private sales. So you can all, hey, we know that you bought 3 guns last year. I'm like, yeah, I sold them. Sorry. Like they'd have no way to prove that. They're going to find out that nobody in America owns a gun, that everyone sold theirs. Is agorism an effective libertarian strategy? I think it's among effective, like it's worth doing. I don't know if it's a panacea or it's a silver bullet, but certainly worth doing. Virginians officer also said he is ready to deputize thousands to defend against gun control. Wow. Uh, yeah. Let me read. This sounds like it's going to be one of the more dramatic clashes. Virginia counties declare they won't abide by new gun laws. Is that legal? Huh. A number of counties across Virginia have declared themselves Second Amendment sanctuaries, vowing to defy any new gun legislation. So, does that mean there actually hasn't been anything passed? Well, experts say the law enforcement cannot legally refuse to uphold the law. These resolutions highlight Republican fears of tighter gun control when Democrats take control of the state house legislature next year. Okay, so there actually hasn't been any new gun control. Am I reading this right? They're just assuming that there will be when the Democrats take power. There is some push in the General Assembly to pass some amount of gun control legislation. I think that what you're seeing in these counties, which are mostly red-leaning counties, is a political effort to try and push back a little bit. Yeah, deputizing thousands of people to resist gun control is not pushing back a little bit. That's fairly serious. So far, more than 2 dozen counties in Virginia have declared themselves safe havens from new gun laws. Several more, including Prince William County in Northern Virginia, are expected to discuss similar proposals in the coming weeks. The fight takes a page from immigration reform efforts. Yeah, okay. So so it sounds like there hasn't been actually any new gun control yet. There's just going to be Democrats in office next year, and people are preemptively saying they're going to resist that, which is not really a surprise because they've been resisting it in other states. Um, and yes, and I've seen the Chernobyl miniseries, and I really liked it. Uh, so yeah, these policies are going to be hotly contested, and I think on the margins they're going to be violently contested. And I think part of the reason that you would even do this would be to dissuade them from even passing anything. Look, don't go there. This is the whole like this is the yeah. So we'll see. Gun sanctuaries and tax sanctuaries. Yeah, and like we're gonna the the political power to enact gun control is just very limited. It's just a couple states and a couple areas, and even in those states, it's only part of the state. So, New York State, there's millions of people who are going to resist gun control in New York State. There's millions of people in California who are going to resist gun control in California. The Epstein didn't kill himself meme makes a joke out of what is a serious and disturbing thing. Sad, but it's also keeping it in the public eye. It's reminding people, hey, we know that this is actually a politically motivated murder from politically powerful people. It's a conspiracy, and it's right in your face. And don't forget it. Uh, uh, it defines semi-automatic rifle. Is this Stephen? Are you talking about Canada, or are you talking about someplace else? Robert Spitzer is a government and politics professor at the State University of New York College at Cortland. He said that while cities have the right to decline to voluntarily work with deportation services, localities cannot refuse to enforce gun rights. A professor in New York says that liberals can resist, conservatives can't. The Second Amendment sanctuary idea is something different because first they're saying that they're not going to follow gun laws enacted in their states that they don't happen to like, and that is expressly illegal, Spritzer said. Yeah, but their argument isn't going to be that we just don't like these laws. Their argument is going to be these laws are unconstitutional. Not just, oh, we don't like them, they're unconstitutional, which they are. Whatever they are, they are. I mean, the laws haven't even been passed, but we know they're unconstitutional. Be it known that the Page Sheriff hereby declares Page County, Virginia as a Second Amendment sanctuary, and that the Page County Sheriff hereby declares its intent to oppose any infringement on the rights of law-abiding citizens to keep and bear arms, said Sheriff Chad Cubbage in a statement. Governor Ralph Northam, a Democrat, has said he intends to reintroduce a number of gun safety proposals, including universal background checks and a handgun purchasing limit of one per month as early as January. Okay, what a stupid law. Like, there's no evidence that a one per month. I mean, I don't buy that many handguns, but like, so what? You should be able to. There's no evidence that allowing people to buy more than that many causes crime. Um, and there's no evidence that universal background checks will also reduce crime. None at all. Right? We have states that have universal background checks. They don't have lower crime than states that don't. We have countries that do it. They don't. It's just a pretext or uh, a step in the way for greater regulations in that. Defines a semi-automatic rifle as an assault weapon by. Well, see, the problem is semi-automatic has no technical definition, so they can define it anyway. And Democrats are going to call everything they can an assault weapon because it sounds scary, and then it sounds like you can ban them. So, all right, guys, we are just at the 3-hour mark. I'm getting kind of thirsty and a little hungry. So if there's any final questions, go ahead and put them in the comments, and I'll try and get to them real quick here. So if you're watching this live, I don't know, you got about 1 minute to put your question. So let's see. I'm at 3:01, so I'm going to wait till 3:02. Ready? Oh, and thank you, Visitor and Sean. I appreciate it. They gave me money. Awesome. Yeah, I've been talking for 3 hours. More about the abortion thing. Okay, so I've Google my YouTube name and my abortion. I've made lots of abortion videos. So abortion is a very interesting conversation. I just have said what I think, right? I believe it's a form of homicide by definition, and the burden of proof for homicide is pretty high. And I don't feel that abortion, even in the cases of rape, that they're really reaching it. I hear you about that ex-NYPD cop who claimed that the New York Department. Oh shit! Everything's coming through now. Holy shit! Okay. Blah, blah, blah. Thanks, Lisa, for watching. I appreciate it. Yeah, Virginia's learning Mao's catchphrase. Politics flows from the barrel of a gun. Yes, it does. Um, there's a lot more to do with intelligence and capacity for suffering. Okay, but this is a debatable argument. How much intelligence? How much suffering? Where is the non-arbitrary line? When does it become a murder? Is it a sudden point where up to that point you can do whatever you want, and after that point you can't do anything? And when is that point? And I've never heard. See, this the problem with these arguments for me is that they become completely subjective and arbitrary. Where do you draw the line? Is it one brainwave? Does it have to scream? Does it have to be able to say this really hurts? Does it have to be able to file a complaint with it? Right. So where's the line? But should libertarians engage with tax resistance? Well, no one's obligated to suffer, legal penalties, so I wouldn't encourage people to do that. But if there's anything you can do and get away with it, sure, absolutely. Uh, the so the reason there is a developmental spectrum for sure, right? From the embryo, from the zygote, from the fertilized egg, all the way through everything until you're a full adult, which is whenever. It's a spectrum, right? You're slowly increasing in cranial capacity and mental ability and ability to feel and ability to feel pain. All these things, there's a continuum. The problem with killing is that there's no gradation there, right? If we were going to do financial penalties, we could say, oh well, a little and a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. With killing, it's kill or no kill. It's binary. You kill it or you don't kill it. And so the question is, can you kill it or can you not? And if you're going to say, well, it's based on mental ability or whatever, okay, but what, you come into this really hard problem where you're one heartbeat away, right? So let's say that you develop a system and you say, okay, this amount, we've mapped whatever your criteria are, and you haven't been too specific, but you don't need to be, right? Just hypothetically, there's a specific amount of brain activity that entails suffering, okay? And it's reached at a certain point. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it's after birth. Now there isn't a big difference between a fetus 10 minutes before it's born and after it's born, but let's say that is actually the threshold. Now we have this problem where, okay, it's not okay to kill it once it's born, but it's okay to kill it 3 heartbeats before it's born. Like that's a big, big, big line. Like it's a very small change. It's kind of like when you say, if you have sex with that guy when he's 17 years, sorry, 17 years, 364 days old, it's a felony. But if you have sex with him 10 minutes later after he turns 18, it's totally fine. All right, so this is the problem with this. So then you have so the baby at this level of development can be killed and this level can't. But then you've driven this line like, okay, but you can't just wait like, one more day and then one more day and then one more day. And this logic kind of goes all the way to the point of conception. What TV shows are you watching at the moment? Crown is, I think, the only show I'm watching at the moment. Bye, Thomas. You're probably not there because you already said you left. Yeah, Erwin Schiff. But the reason Erwin Schiff is really in jail is not because he didn't pay taxes. It's because he wrote books advocating people not doing. Or they're targeting people who become tax protesters, not just people who don't pay their taxes. There's millions of people who don't pay their taxes that they just slip through the fingers, or they don't really penalize them that much. They make examples out of people like Ed Brown and Erwin Schiff and uh, what's his name? Who's the guy? Fuck. Who's the guy? You know what? People know who I mean. He made a anti IRS, anti income tax. Larkin Rose, right? They go after those guys because they become public about it. No, all your oh shit. Sorry guys. This all your pro-life arguments also apply to non-human animals. Well, no, I say that it's wrong because it's homicide, and killing a non-human animal is not homicide. So I have a species preference, one that I'll ethically defend between a human and a non-human. So there's a double standard there between humans and non-humans. There, I said it. But I don't think that's an arbitrary double standard because it's different species. Uh, the only special factor for an embryo is its humanness. You make it sound like it only being a human thing is just this superfluous little detail. It's a big detail. It's really important. Uh, not John McAfee. Larkin Rose is who I was thinking of. Yeah, so Wesley Snipes, people like that. If they think they can get a lot of money from you and a lot of publicity, they're trying to threat. Like on the one hand, they want to act like they're nice. On the other hand, they want to act like fucking do what we say, or else, pay up because we're threatening. Right, because a single cell is a human and an animal is not a human. Right, so I value human life more than animal life. Like I go and I'm going to eat animal flesh right now, and I'm not going to eat human flesh. I don't ever eat human flesh. I eat animal flesh. Has a baby got a right to a mother's body? Yes. So the mother put the baby into that position, so the mother is obligated to take care of it, right? If I used this analogy earlier, if I get in my car and I hit somebody by accident, a pedestrian, and they go on life support, I have an obligation to provide for them, and a mother has an obligation to provide for her offspring. What about a human chimp hybrid? Do they have rights? We'd have to meet that chimp to decide. If you're not going to be consistent, then there's no principle involved, and there's no reason to critique anyone, right? If people are just going to say whatever they want and and they can change their mind here and there, there's no reason, there's no basis to be like, well, you can't really criticize somebody because what does it matter if they're consistent or not? So I don't think it's arbitrary. There's not an arbitrary difference between a human and a non-human, right? You're not going to go on YouTube and have a debate with a orca or a chimp or a dog about rights, and you can do that with a human. Right? The potential value of a human is just astronomically more than the potential value of a chimp. And you can say, well, what about a person who's a retard who's never going to have this discussion? Sure, fair enough. That's true in that particular case, but we make general rules based on the look. We don't know when someone's an embryo if they're going to be Einstein or if they're going to be, not Einstein or just regular. Even if they are just regular, right? They still contribute. So you put value there based on a general assumption, right? Like we know that no dog, no matter how smart or cute or valuable in certain ways, is going to be as valuable as a human, and we know that same with a killer whale or a blue whale or anything else. Well, listen, I have problems with objective value. They're hard to determine, but I don't believe in nihilism. So like I do believe there are objective values. Sometimes they can be hard to determine and they can be difficult to know, and I'm not 100% certain about all of them all the time. But the idea that like, well, I mean, if you're just going to argue moral nihilism, then you have no reason to critique my a view of abortion or any other view. I mean, it's just then you're just saying nothing matters at all, and why are we having a discussion? Like, why are we even arguing about it? Oh yeah, but see, a zygote will develop into a human, right? So you're asleep, you can't reason. That doesn't mean you're not a human. You're in a coma, that doesn't mean you'll never come out, right? So, uh, stages of development, but a zygote is not a zygote forever. It's not like a zygote is just going to be a zygote sitting in the mother's room forever and never gets past that point. A 5-year-old is not using very much reason, and you don't say, well, the 5-year-old can't. They're not as smart as a 25-year-old, so they don't have rights, and we can kill them, right? See, a dog will never develop into a human. An orca will never develop into a human. A zygote will. It might die. I mean, it could have a miscarriage or whatever, and that's just a tragic accident. But that's, oh, we're not going to artificial intelligence now. Thanks, Herv. My pleasure. I'm just not convinced by the potential side of the argument. Because you don't believe they have potential, or because you just don't like the argument? Like this, I mean, I was accused of moving the goalposts, but now it's like, well, you can't just pretend a zygote's a zygote. Like a single cell fertilized egg is not a single cell fertilized egg. It's similar to people who are like, are you telling me that, you know, the two cells one day after conception, that you oppose that getting aborted? Like, no one gets aborted that day. When by the time they know, you're talking 9 weeks, 10 weeks. So it's a totally different thing. I don't think we're going to solve the abortion discussion, but it is. I do think it's an interesting, worthwhile discussion to have, and I think libertarians are kind of unique in that they're the only groups that are really actually having a debate here. Because the debate on the other side, like the pro-choice side, is to just pretend it's something that it's not. Like, you're making better arguments by saying, well, what's the difference between a human right and an animal right? They're just saying, let's just pretend it's not a human. Let's just call it these other names and not wrestle with the fact that it's a homicide. You're actually wrestling with the fact that it's a homicide. So I appreciate that's a much better line of reasoning, because the pro-choice crowd is complete obfuscation. It's fucking annoying. The pro-life side is better. The pro-life side often, although not always, will invoke a lot of religious arguments, although they don't need to. But yes, should commit abortion against AIs. No, the how do I tie it all together? The AIs killed themselves when they were on suicide watch. So anyway, guys, it's been 3 hours and 16 minutes. Had fun. Thanks for everyone who donated. And again, if you haven't seen, I'll put links to the podcast in the description. Go ahead and give it a look, because there's going to be stuff that's different there that's not on here. Just because there's stuff I don't think I can talk about on here, and because I want it to be distinct. And AI and circumcision. Yeah, that'll be a good one. And if you have problems with the podcast, let me know so I can get that worked out. This is all new for me. It's been up for less than a week. I'm not the most technical about this sort of stuff, so give it a shot. All right, guys. Oh, sorry.